The trauma bay doors slam open at 2:47 a.m. A soldier's body hits the gurney, blood arcing across white tile in violent spurts. His neck is shredded, carotid exposed, life draining in rhythmic pulses. Surgeons are 3 minutes out. He has 90 seconds. A slight figure in scrubs steps forward. Claire Whitmore, the quiet night nurse everyone ignores. Her hands move with terrifying precision. Clamp, compress, suture. 3 movements that shouldn't be possible for someone who graduated nursing school 2 years ago. The artery seals. The bleeding stops. The room goes dead silent. Dr. Marcus Thornhill, chief trauma surgeon, stares at her hands like they're weapons. That's battlefield stitching, military-grade technique. Where the hell did you learn that? Claire's face drains of color. Because the one thing she spent 3 years hiding just saved a man's life and destroyed her cover. Before we dive into Claire's story, I want to invite you to stick with me until the very end. Drop a like, leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's see what happens when a woman trained for war gets cornered by the truth. The soldier's name was Private Joel Ramsey, 23 years old, on leave from his 3rd deployment. The IED fragments in his shoulder were old news. The bar fight that tore open his neck was stupid luck gone bad. He should have died on that gurney. Claire Whitmore saved him in under 2 minutes. Now she stood in the hallway outside the trauma bay, her scrubs stiff with dried blood, while Marcus Thornhill's footsteps echoed toward her like a countdown. She'd worked at Riverside General Hospital in Portland, Oregon for 18 months. 18 months of keeping her head down, doing her job, being invisible. That was over now. My office, now. Thornhill didn't look at her when he said it. The chief's office sat on the 3rd floor, overlooking the ambulance bay. Through the window, dawn light was starting to crack the darkness. Claire stood while Thornhill sat, his fingers drumming against the mahogany desk. "I've been a trauma surgeon for 22 years, he said quietly. "I've trained at Johns Hopkins, worked field hospitals in 3 war zones, and I've never seen a nurse perform a carotid repair like that. Not even close. I did what the situation required." "Bullshit." The word came out flat. "You performed a modified combat compression suture. That technique isn't taught in civilian nursing programs. It's barely taught in military medical training because it requires surgical precision most field medics don't have. So I'll ask again, where did you learn it?" Claire's jaw tightened. "I read a lot. Reading doesn't give you muscle memory. Reading doesn't give you the confidence to step into a trauma situation and take control like you've done it 100 times before." He leaned forward. "I pulled your file. Claire Whitmore. Graduated from Pacific Coast Nursing Academy 3 years ago. Top of your class. Impeccable references. Clean record. Then we're done here. Except your employment history has gaps. 8 months after graduation, you vanished. No work history, no addresses, nothing. Then you resurface 14 months later, applying for night shifts at hospitals that don't ask too many questions." The silence stretched between them like a blade. "I have a right to privacy. Not when you're performing procedures above your pay grade in my hospital." Thornhill stood. "I'm suspending you pending a credential review. 2 weeks. Don't come back until HR clears you." Claire's hands clenched at her sides. "Private Ramsey would be dead if I hadn't stepped in. Private Ramsey would have been stabilized by protocol until I arrived. You overstepped, and until I know who you really are, you're a liability I can't afford." She left without another word. The nurse's station was already buzzing when she walked past. Whispers followed her like smoke. Sarah Chen, no, she caught herself. Sarah Morrison, one of the day shift nurses, didn't even bother lowering her voice. "I heard she literally pushed Dr. Reeves out of the way, like she thought she was some kind of surgeon." "She's been weird since day one," another voice chimed in. "Never talks about her past. Never joins us for drinks." Claire grabbed her bag from her locker and walked out into the parking garage. The autumn air bit at her face. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally crashing. She'd held it together in that trauma bay because holding it together was what she'd been trained to do. Break down later, save the life first. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom unit in a building that asked for first and last month's rent and nothing else. No credit checks, no references, cash only. The kind of place where neighbors didn't make eye contact. She dropped her bag by the door and stood in the center of the room, staring at nothing. The burner phone in her kitchen drawer started vibrating. She'd had that phone for 3 years. It had rung exactly twice. Both times had been wrong numbers. She stared at it now, watching it skitter across the counter. She answered. "Claire Whitmore?" A man's voice. Clipped. Official. "Who's asking?" "This is Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, U.S. Army Medical Command. I need you to confirm your identity." Her blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Former Captain Claire J. Whitmore, service number 47729581. Honorable discharge dated March 17th, 3 years ago. Medical Corps, 75th Forward Surgical Team. 2 tours in Afghanistan." "Is this you?" She closed her eyes. "How did you get this number?" "Someone flagged your name in a hospital incident report, a carotid repair on a trauma patient. The technique matched field protocols you would have learned during your service." Davidson's voice softened slightly. "I'm not here to cause problems, Captain. I'm here because there's been chatter, people asking questions about you, questions we thought were settled." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that involve Kandahar province. October 2019, the incident that ended your career." Claire's apartment suddenly felt too small. "That case was closed. I was cleared." "You were discharged. That's not the same thing." Papers rustled on the other end of the line. "Look, I don't know what you're doing in Portland or why you're working under your real name in a civilian hospital, but you need to understand something. Someone is digging into what happened. Someone with resources. And if they connect you to that trauma saved last night, your quiet life is over." "Who?" "I don't know yet. But stay low. Don't draw attention. And for the love of God, don't perform any more battlefield medicine in front of cameras." The line went dead. Claire set the phone down carefully. Her hands had stopped shaking. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. She walked to her closet and pulled out a box from the top shelf. Inside were things she hadn't looked at in 3 years. A uniform, commendations, a photograph of her surgical team standing outside a field hospital, dust and sun behind them, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. And underneath everything else, a thick folder marked confidential in red letters. She opened it. Inside were copies of every document related to the incident in Kandahar. Patient records, surgical logs, witness statements, and at the bottom, a single photograph that made her chest tighten. A young Afghan girl, maybe 19, lying on a field operating table. The girl's name had been Amira Hassan. She'd been brought in with catastrophic abdominal injuries from an IED. Claire had operated for 6 hours straight, doing everything right, following every protocol. Amira had died anyway. The official investigation had cleared Claire of wrongdoing, insufficient resources, unsurvivable injuries, bad luck. But someone higher up the chain had wanted a different story. Someone had pushed for negligence charges. Court-martial proceedings had been initiated. And then, just as suddenly, everything had been dropped. Claire had been given an honorable discharge and told to disappear. She never knew why. She never knew who had wanted her gone. And she'd spent 3 years looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now it was dropping. She closed the folder and shoved the box back into the closet. Sleep wasn't going to happen. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. The suspension meant 2 weeks of nothing, 2 weeks of waiting, 2 weeks of knowing that Thornhill was digging into her background and finding inconsistencies. Her phone buzzed. Not the burner, her regular cell. A text from an unknown number. "You performed well last night. We need to talk. Meet me at Powell's Books coffee shop section, 2 p.m. Come alone. Don't tell anyone." Claire stared at the message. Every instinct screamed trap, but whoever sent it knew what she'd done last night, knew where to find her, and most importantly, knew she'd show up because the alternative was waiting around for the walls to close in. She texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knows what really happened in Kandahar, and someone who can prove you're not the one who should have been discharged." At 1:45 p.m., Claire walked into Powell's Books in downtown Portland. The massive independent bookstore sprawled across an entire city block, a maze of rooms and levels and endless shelves. The coffee shop sat on the 3rd floor, tucked into a corner with mismatched furniture and the smell of burnt espresso. She ordered black coffee and found a table with a view of the entrance. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman walked in, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing civilian clothes but moving with military bearing. She scanned the room, locked eyes with Claire, and walked over. Captain Whitmore? She sat down without asking. I'm Rachel Voss, Defense Intelligence Agency. Retired. I'm not a captain anymore. Once an officer, always an officer. Voss set a tablet on the table between them. I'm going to be direct because we don't have much time. The incident in Kandahar that destroyed your career wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated. Claire's coffee went cold in her hands. By who? By someone who needed a scapegoat to cover up a much bigger problem. Voss tapped the tablet screen. Do you remember Colonel Richard Brennan? He was the commanding officer of medical operations in your sector. I remember. He signed off on my discharge paperwork. He also signed off on falsified medical supply reports, diverted shipments of critical medications, and covered up at least 4 other surgical deaths that occurred under his watch. Deaths that happened because field hospitals didn't have the resources they needed. Resources that Brennan was selling on the black market. The bookstore noise faded into the background. Claire's voice came out flat. You're saying Amira Hassan died because we didn't have the supplies to save her, and Brennan blamed me to hide his own crimes. I'm saying Amira Hassan was one of 14 patients who died in that sector because of Brennan's supply chain manipulations. But you were the only surgeon who pushed back, who demanded audits, who wouldn't let it go. So Brennan made sure you couldn't fight back. Why are you telling me this now? Voss leaned back. Because Brennan just got promoted. He's now Deputy Surgeon General of the United States Army. And there's a Senate confirmation hearing in 3 weeks. If the truth about Kandahar comes out, it destroys him. And he knows it. Which means he's doing everything in his power to make sure anyone who could expose him stays silent. He's coming after me. He already is. That hospital incident report from last night, it got flagged in military databases within 2 hours. Someone's been watching for your name to pop up. And now that it has, Brennan's people are going to dig until they find something they can use against you, or until they make sure you can't talk. Claire's hands were steady now. What do you want from me? I want you to testify. I have evidence, documentation, witness statements, financial records, but I need someone who was there, someone who saw what happened, someone credible. I'm a disgraced former officer working night shifts in a civilian hospital. I'm not credible. You saved a soldier's life last night using skills you learned in the same medical corps that Brennan tried to destroy you for serving in. That makes you credible. Voss stood. Think about it, but don't think too long. Brennan's already moving against you. She left the tablet on the table. Claire picked it up. The screen showed a scanned document, a military personnel file. Her file. But the dates were wrong. Someone had altered her service record to show disciplinary actions that never happened. Reprimands for insubordination, failed performance reviews, a pattern of negligence leading up to Kandahar. None of it was true. But it was now in the official record. Her phone buzzed, a text from Thornhill. Need to see you tomorrow morning. 9 a.m., non-negotiable. She walked out of Powell's into gray October afternoon. The streets were crowded with lunch hour traffic. Somewhere in this city, people were going about normal lives, going to work, picking up groceries, complaining about the rain. Claire's life had never been normal. She'd joined the Army at 22 because she wanted to do something that mattered. Medical school had been too expensive, too slow. The military offered training, purpose, deployment. She'd excelled, made captain by 26, led surgical teams in conditions that would break most people. And then Amira Hassan had died on her table, and everything had collapsed. Now someone was rewriting history to make sure it stayed collapsed. Her apartment felt different when she returned. Nothing had been moved. Nothing was out of place. But the air felt wrong. She checked the locks, checked the windows, found nothing. Then she opened her laptop. Someone had accessed it. The login timestamp showed activity from 2 hours ago while she'd been at the bookstore. Her files had been searched. Her browsing history copied. Every document she'd saved about Kandahar had been viewed. They'd been in her home. The burner phone rang again. This time she didn't hesitate. What? Captain Whitmore, this is Colonel Davidson again. We have a situation. There's a military medical transport incoming to your hospital. ETA 30 minutes. High priority casualty from a training accident at Fort Stevens. Severe head trauma. They're asking for you specifically. I'm suspended. The request came from very high up. Someone wants you in that trauma bay. Davidson's voice dropped. And Captain, the patient's name is Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, the colonel's son. Claire's blood turned to ice. This is a setup. Almost certainly, but if you don't show up, they'll use it as evidence of dereliction. And if you do show up and something goes wrong, I'm the scapegoat again. I'd advise you to run. Get out of Portland. I can help relocate you. Claire looked at the tablet Voss had left, at the falsified records, at 3 years of hiding and silence and letting someone else's lies define her truth. No. Captain, I said no. I'm done running. She ended the call. 28 minutes later, she walked through the emergency entrance of Riverside General Hospital wearing clean scrubs she kept in her car. The night shift staff stared. Security moved to intercept her. Dr. Thornhill appeared from the trauma bay, his face unreadable. You're suspended. I heard you have a military transport incoming. Head trauma case. I'm the most experienced combat medic in this building. You're also under investigation. Then investigate me after the patient is stable. Sir? She held his gaze. You want to know who I really am? Watch me work. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Thornhill's jaw worked. Then he stepped aside. One chance, Whitmore. Don't make me regret this. The trauma bay doors exploded open for the second time in 24 hours. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan Jr. came through those doors strapped to a backboard, his head immobilized in a cervical collar, blood matting his hair and streaming down the side of his face. 2 Army medics flanked the gurney, their uniforms crisp despite the chaos, their faces locked in professional neutrality that didn't quite hide the tension underneath. Claire moved before anyone else could react. Her hands went to the patient's wrist, pulse rapid and thready, while her eyes scanned the visible injuries. Depressed skull fracture, left temporal region, pupils unequal. Glasgow coma scale maybe 7. Not good. What happened? She directed the question at the senior medic, a staff sergeant with 20 years etched into the lines around his eyes. Training exercise. High-altitude tactical insertion. Lieutenant Brennan's chute failed to deploy properly. Impact velocity estimated at 40 miles per hour. Thornhill appeared at her shoulder, already gloving up. Get me a CT scan stat. I want neurosurgery down here now. Neurosurgery's in another case, one of the residents called out. Motorcycle accident. They're at least 2 hours out. 2 hours? Thornhill's voice went sharp. This patient doesn't have 2 hours. Claire was already cutting away the lieutenant's flight suit, exposing his chest for monitoring leads. His breathing was labored, irregular, Cheney-Stokes pattern, brainstem involvement. The clock wasn't ticking, it was sprinting. We need to relieve the intracranial pressure now, she said quietly, before his brain herniates. Thornhill shot her a look. That requires a burr hole procedure. That's neurosurgery. That's field medicine. I've done it 40 times. The trauma bay went quiet except for the patient's ragged breathing and the steady beep of monitors. One of the Army medics stepped forward. Ma'am, if you're qualified. She's a nurse, Thornhill cut him off. She doesn't perform surgical procedures. Claire met his eyes. I was a trauma surgeon. Captain, United States Army Medical Corps. 75th Forward Surgical Team. I've performed emergency cranial decompressions in field hospitals with worse equipment than what's in this room. She turned back to the patient. And if we don't do this in the next 10 minutes, Colonel Brennan is going to lose his son. Thornhill's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Shock, anger, calculation. He glanced at the monitors, at the patient's deteriorating vitals, at the clock on the wall. Prep him, he said finally. I'll assist. The next 8 minutes moved like combat. Claire's hands fell into rhythms she'd forced herself to forget. The precise movements of mapping the skull, identifying the surgical site, prepping the field. Thornhill worked opposite her, his initial skepticism giving way to sharp focus as he watched her mark the entry point with the confidence of someone who'd done this intense while mortars fell outside. Local anesthetic, Claire said. The nurse, Jamie Rodriguez, one of the few who didn't gossip, slapped the syringe into her palm. Claire infiltrated the injection site. Scalpel. The blade came down in a clean incision. Blood welled up. She controlled it with practiced efficiency, using retraction and cautery to expose the skull beneath. Drill. Thornhill handed her the perforator drill himself. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He nodded once. Claire positioned this bit against the skull and applied steady pressure. The high-pitched whine of the drill filled the trauma bay. Bone dust scattered. She felt the resistance change as the bit penetrated through to the dura mater beneath. Blood and cerebrospinal fluid immediately began draining from the hole, dark red mixed with clear fluid, the pressure release visible and immediate. The monitors changed, heart rate steadying, blood pressure stabilizing, respiratory patterns smoothing out. She'd just bought Marcus Brennan Jr. the time neurosurgery needed to arrive. Claire stepped back, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash already starting to build in her chest. Thornhill was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "Where the hell did you really learn to do that?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, the trauma bay doors opened again. This time, the man who walked through wore a full army dress uniform, stars gleaming on his shoulders. Colonel Richard Brennan looked exactly like his official photographs, steel gray hair, square jaw, the kind of face that inspired confidence in congressional hearings. His eyes went immediately to his son on the table. "Status?" he demanded. Thornhill moved to intercept him. "Colonel, your son suffered severe head trauma. We've performed an emergency decompression to relieve intracranial pressure. Neurosurgery is en route. He's stable for now." Brennan's gaze swept the room and locked onto Claire. Recognition flashed across his face, cold and immediate. "You." Claire said nothing. "You're the one who operated on my son?" His voice carried the weight of command, the expectation of immediate answers. "I performed a burr hole decompression to prevent brain herniation," Claire said evenly. "Your son's alive because of it." "My son's injured because someone at Fort Stevens failed to properly inspect his equipment." Brennan moved closer, his presence filling the small space. "And now I find out the person who operated on him is a disgraced former officer with a history of negligence." The trauma bay went dead silent. Thornhill stepped between them. "Colonel, I don't know what history you're referring to, but the woman standing in front of you just saved your son's life using skills that, frankly, exceed anything I've seen in 20 years of trauma surgery. Skills she obtained through fraudulent means." Brennan pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Captain Claire Whitmore was discharged from the Army Medical Corps following an investigation into patient death. Multiple violations of protocol, insubordination, falsification of medical records." He held up the paper. "This is her service record." Claire's hands clenched. Those were the falsified documents she'd seen on Voss's tablet, lies that had been inserted into official systems. "That record is fabricated," she said. "This record is signed by 3 superior officers and verified by the Army Medical Command." Brennan's voice was ice. "You were removed from service because you were a danger to the patients under your care, and now you've operated on my son without proper civilian credentials." Thornhill held up a hand. "Wait. Back up. Claire, you were a military surgeon." "Yes." "And you were discharged for negligence?" "I was discharged because Colonel Brennan needed someone to blame for his own crimes." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Brennan's face went rigid. "That's slander." "That's truth." Claire's voice didn't waver. "You diverted medical supplies from field hospitals in Kandahar province. Medications, surgical equipment, blood products. You sold them on the black market and 14 patients died because we didn't have the resources to save them. I was one of the surgeons who started asking questions, so you falsified documents to make it look like I was responsible for one of those deaths." "You're delusional." "I have proof." Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You have nothing. And even if you did, who's going to believe a disgraced officer with a history of mental instability?" "Mental instability?" Claire's voice went sharp. "It's in your file. Post-traumatic stress, erratic behavior, unfounded accusations against superior officers." Brennan turned to Thornhill. "Doctor, I'm formally requesting that this woman be removed from my son's care immediately. I'm also filing a complaint with the State Medical Board regarding her unauthorized practice of medicine." Thornhill looked between them, his face struggling with competing calculations. "Colonel, with respect, your son is stable because of her intervention. My son is at risk because an unstable individual with no current medical license performed surgery on him." Brennan's voice dropped to something colder. "Remove her, now, or I'll have federal investigators in this hospital within the hour questioning every credential of every staff member who allowed this to happen." The threat was clear. Claire could see Thornhill doing the math. One suspended nurse versus the entire hospital's reputation. Claire, Thornhill said quietly, step out. Are you serious? Step out, now. That's an order. Claire looked at Lieutenant Brennan on the table, at the monitors showing stable vitals, at the life she'd just saved. Then she looked at his father, at the man who destroyed her career 3 years ago and was doing it again now with the same lies. She stripped off her gloves and walked out. The hallway was empty. Claire made it to the nurse's locker room before her hands started shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Pure, burning rage that she'd buried for 3 years under silence and survival instincts and the desperate need to just disappear. She'd saved that kid's life, and his father was using it to destroy her, again. Her phone buzzed. Voss. The message was short. He moved faster than I expected. Get somewhere public, now. Claire grabbed her bag and walked out through the emergency exit. The October evening had turned cold, rain starting to mist down from low clouds. She made it 3 blocks before she noticed the car following her, a black sedan with government plates. She ducked into a crowded coffee shop on Morrison Street. The sedan parked across the street. 2 men in suits got out but didn't follow her inside. They just watched. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Stop calling me, she answered. Claire Whitmore? A woman's voice this time. Professional. Clipped. This is Agent Sarah Keating, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need you to stay where you are. Don't leave the coffee shop. Federal agents are en route to your location. On what grounds? You're wanted for questioning regarding fraudulent representation of medical credentials and unauthorized practice of medicine. There's also a flag on your background for potential national security concerns. National security? Claire almost laughed. Let me guess. Colonel Brennan filed the complaint. The complaint came through official channels. That's all I can tell you. Keating's voice softened slightly. Ma'am, I'd advise you to cooperate. Make this easy on yourself. Claire ended the call. Through the window, she could see more cars arriving. Federal agents this time, FBI windbreakers visible even in the rain. They were setting up a perimeter, blocking exits. This wasn't a simple questioning. This was an arrest. She had maybe 2 minutes before they came through the door. Her phone buzzed again. Voss. Back exit. Green Honda. Keys under the mat. Go. Claire didn't hesitate. She walked toward the restrooms, then slipped through the employee corridor to the back alley. The green Honda was exactly where Voss said it would be. She found the keys, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic just as FBI agents burst through the coffee shop's front door. Her phone rang immediately. Voss. Where am I going? Claire asked. East on Interstate 84. There's a motel in Hood River, room 247. I'll meet you there. They're going to track this car. Plates are registered to a shell company. You've got maybe 4 hours before they figure it out. Drive. Claire drove. The highway stretched into darkness. Rain hammering the windshield, city lights giving way to the black outline of the Columbia River Gorge. Her mind kept replaying the trauma bay, the look on Thornhill's face when she'd revealed who she was, the cold calculation in Brennan's eyes, the way the system had closed around her like a fist. She'd done everything right. She'd saved a life. And she was running from federal agents because the truth didn't matter when someone with enough power wanted to bury it. The motel in Hood River was the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask for ID if you paid cash. Claire parked behind the building and took the stairs to the second floor. Room 247's door was unlocked. Voss sat at a small table with a laptop and 3 different cell phones spread in front of her. You're now a fugitive, Voss said without preamble. Brennan moved fast. He filed federal complaints, triggered national security flags, and got 6 agencies looking for you. He's covering his tracks. By burying me. By making sure you can't testify. Voss turned the laptop around. But he made a mistake. He moved so aggressively that people are starting to ask questions. I've got 3 senators who want to know why a decorated combat surgeon is suddenly wanted on federal charges. And I've got a congressional aide who's very interested in why Colonel Brennan's son just happened to need emergency surgery performed by the one person who can destroy Brennan's confirmation hearing. Claire stared at the screen. It showed email threads, official correspondence, questions being raised in chambers that actually mattered. How long before they find me here? Realistically? Dawn. Maybe sooner. Voss closed the laptop. Which is why we're not staying. There's a cabin in the Cascade foothills, off-grid, no digital footprint. We hole up there for 72 hours while I coordinate with the senators who are willing to go on record. And then what? And then you testify, in front of cameras, in front of Congress. You tell them everything. Kandahar, the supply diversions, the 14 deaths, Brennan's cover-up. You become the witness who can't be disappeared because the whole country is watching. Claire's laugh came out harsh. You really think testimony is going to stop him? He's the Deputy Surgeon General nominee. He has resources, connections, power. I'm a fugitive with a fabricated service record. You're also the only person who can prove he's a criminal. Voss stood. Look, I get it. You've been running for 3 years. You built a quiet life. You stayed invisible. And now I'm asking you to step into the spotlight and fight someone who's already proven he'll destroy you. But here's the thing. He only wins if you stay silent. The moment you start talking, really talking, with evidence to back it up, his whole house of cards collapses. Unless he kills me first. He won't. Too visible now. You vanish or die, and it confirms everything. He needs you discredited, not dead. Voss grabbed her laptop. Come on. We've got a 3-hour drive, and I'd like to be off the main roads before the FBI figures out that Honda. They drove north into the mountains, switching cars twice at rest stops where Voss had vehicles pre-positioned. By midnight, they were on a dirt road climbing through dense forest. No lights except the headlights cutting through rain and darkness. The cabin appeared like something out of a different era. Rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, solar panels barely visible on the roof. No neighbors, no cell signal, just silence and the sound of rain on the roof. Inside, Voss immediately set up a satellite internet connection and started working. Claire stood by the window, watching darkness, feeling the weight of 3 years catch up to her all at once. Why are you helping me? She asked. Voss didn't look up from her laptop. Because 15 years ago, I was an intelligence analyst who found evidence of contractor fraud in Iraq. Millions of dollars, dead soldiers, the whole thing. I reported it through official channels. 2 weeks later, I was under investigation for mishandling classified materials. My career ended. The people I reported faced no consequences. She finally met Claire's eyes. I've spent the last decade making sure that doesn't happen to other people. You're not the first person Brennan has buried, but if I have anything to say about it, you'll be the last. Claire's phone, her regular cell, not the burner, started buzzing. She'd turned it off hours ago. Now it was somehow on, the screen showing an incoming call from a blocked number. She answered, already knowing. Captain Whitmore. Colonel Brennan's voice was smooth, almost friendly. I think we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Then listen. You've made this much harder than it needed to be. Running from federal agents, involving retired intelligence officers, making accusations you can't prove. It's all very dramatic, but ultimately pointless. I have proof, documentation, witnesses. You have nothing that will stand up in any court or congressional hearing, and even if you did, you're currently a fugitive wanted for practicing medicine without proper credentials and endangering a patient's life. Your credibility is destroyed. No one will believe you. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. Your son is alive because I saved him. My son is traumatized because an unstable individual performed unauthorized surgery on him. That's the story. That's what the media will report. That's what the investigation will conclude. Brennan's voice hardened. You had a chance to disappear quietly, Claire. I gave you 3 years. You should have stayed gone. You killed 14 people in Kandahar. I prioritized resources during wartime. Difficult decisions and impossible circumstances. Every commander makes them. The difference is, I'm still serving, still contributing, still moving forward, and you're hiding in a cabin in the woods, running out of options. How did you find you? Please, you think a retired DIA analyst operating on a shoestring budget can hide you from federal resources? I've known where you were since you left Portland. I'm calling to offer you a choice. Turn yourself into federal custody right now. Cooperate with the investigation. Admit that your accusations against me stem from PTSD and mental instability. Do that, and I'll ensure the charges are reduced. You'll spend a few months in psychiatric evaluation instead of years in prison. And if I refuse, then I stop being merciful. The FBI finds you in the next few hours. Resisting arrest gets added to the charges. Your friend Voss gets charged with aiding a fugitive. And I make sure every detail of your breakdown gets leaked to the media, the accusations, the paranoia, the erratic behavior. You become a cautionary tale about untreated combat stress, and no one ever believes a word you say again. The line went dead. Claire set the phone down carefully. Voss was watching her, face tight. He knows we're here, Claire said. Then we move again. He knows where I am because he has federal resources tracking me. We can't outrun that. So what are you saying? Claire looked at the phone, at the laptop showing email threads from senators who might actually care, at 3 years of running condensed into one impossible choice. I'm saying we stop running. We go to them. That's suicide. That's the only play we have left. Claire's voice was steady now, the same tone she'd used in field hospitals when everything was falling apart and someone needed to make a decision. Brennan's right about one thing. I can't win by hiding. But if I turn myself in publicly in front of cameras with a statement about Kandahar on record before I'm in custody, then the story's out. He can't bury it. Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I can arrange media, senators' offices, make it a circus that the FBI can't shut down quietly. How fast? 6 hours? Maybe 8. I need to coordinate, get people in position. We don't have 8 hours. He said the FBI's coming. Then we buy time. Voss pulled out her phone and started dialing. I know a civil rights attorney in Portland. She can file injunctions, make noise, slow down the federal machinery long enough to get you in front of cameras. But Claire, once we do this, there's no going back. You're betting everything that the truth matters more than Brennan's power. Claire thought about Private Ramsey, alive because she'd stepped forward. About Lieutenant Brennan, stable because she'd refused to run when it mattered. About Amir Hassan and 13 other patients who'd died because someone had valued profit over lives. Make the calls, she said. Voss worked for 3 straight hours, her voice low and urgent as she coordinated with attorneys, journalists, Senate staffers, anyone who could help turn Claire's surrender into a public event that couldn't be quietly suppressed. Claire sat by the window, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to gray, thinking about what came next. At 4:47 a.m., headlights appeared on the dirt road. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. They're here, Claire said quietly. Voss looked up from her laptop. I need 30 more minutes. We don't have 30 minutes. The vehicles stopped outside the cabin. Doors opened. Flashlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness. A voice amplified through a bullhorn. Claire Whitmore, this is the FBI. The cabin is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Voss was still on her phone, talking rapid fire to someone. Get them to the courthouse steps. 7 a.m. I don't care how. Just do it. Claire walked to the cabin door. Don't open that, Voss hissed. Claire opened it anyway. FBI agents stood in a semicircle, weapons drawn but pointed at the ground. The agent in front, a woman in her 40s with the bullhorn, lowered it when she saw Claire. Miss Whitmore, I'm Special Agent Crawford. I need you to step outside slowly, hands where I can see them. Claire did. The air was cold, rain misting down. Behind the FBI vehicles, she could see more arriving. Local police, federal marshals, someone had brought an entire task force. I'll cooperate, Claire said clearly, her voice carrying in the quiet morning. But I have a statement to make first, and I want media present. Crawford's expression didn't change. That's not how this works. You're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. I'm not remaining silent. Not anymore. Claire's voice got stronger. 3 years ago, Colonel Richard Brennan, currently nominated for Deputy Surgeon General, falsified documents to cover up his theft of military medical supplies. 14 patients died in Kandahar province because of his crimes. I was one of the surgeons who tried to expose him. He destroyed my career to protect himself, and now he's using federal law enforcement to silence me again. Crawford held up a hand, signaling the other agents to wait. Miss Whitmore, I have evidence, documentation, witness testimony, and I'm willing to surrender to federal custody right now, this moment, if you guarantee me one thing. I get to make a public statement before I'm taken into custody. On camera, on record, so that when I disappear into your system, people know why. Crawford's eyes flicked to someone behind Claire. She turned. Rachel Voss stood in the cabin doorway, phone still pressed to her ear, and nodded once. Crawford's radio crackled. She listened to something, her face unreadable, then looked back at Claire. "There are news crews assembling at the federal courthouse in Portland," Crawford said slowly. "Someone tipped them off about a major arrest in a military corruption case. My orders are to transport you there directly." She paused. "Looks like you get your public statement after all." Claire's hands were cuffed, not roughly, but firmly, and she was placed in the back of an FBI vehicle. Through the window, she watched the cabin disappear as they drove back down the mountain. Voss followed in a separate car, her phone still glued to her ear, coordinating. The drive took 90 minutes. Dawn broke fully as they entered Portland, gray light revealing a city waking up to a story it didn't know was coming. The federal courthouse steps were already crowded when they arrived. News cameras, reporters, a small crowd of people who'd somehow heard something was happening and showed up to watch. And standing at the edge of the media scrum, 3 people in business suits who Voss had mentioned, Senate staffers, here to bear witness. Special Agent Crawford opened Claire's door and helped her out. The cameras immediately swung toward them, lenses focusing, microphones extending. Crawford leaned in close. "You've got 5 minutes. After that, you're in federal custody pending arraignment. Make it count." Claire walked up the courthouse steps, hands still cuffed in front of her, and turned to face the cameras. For 3 years, she'd been silent. Now every lens in Portland was pointed at her, waiting. She opened her mouth to speak, and a black SUV screeched to a stop at the curb. Colonel Richard Brennan stepped out, still in full-dress uniform, flanked by 2 Army officers and a civilian attorney. He strode toward the courthouse steps with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle. "Agent Crawford," he called out, "I'm invoking national security protocols. This woman is in possession of classified information related to military operations. She cannot make any public statements without Department of Defense clearance." The media erupted. Questions flew. Cameras swung between Claire and Brennan. Crawford looked genuinely uncertain now. "Colonel, I have orders to allow—" "Your orders are superseded by national security concerns. I have documentation." Brennan's attorney stepped forward with a folder thick with official-looking papers. "Captain Whitmore signed classification agreements during her service. Any statements she makes regarding her time in Kandahar province are subject to military review." Claire's stomach dropped. He'd found another way to silence her, even here, even now. One of the reporters shouted a question. "Colonel Brennan, is it true your son was treated by this woman yesterday?" Brennan's face flickered, just for a second, before smoothing back into military composure. "My son received emergency medical treatment. The circumstances are under investigation." "Is it true she saved his life?" "The circumstances are under investigation," Brennan repeated, voice harder. Another reporter. "Captain Whitmore, what happened in Kandahar?" Claire looked at Brennan, at the cameras, at the moment she'd been running from for 3 years, finally arriving whether she was ready or not. "I signed classification agreements," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the noise. "I agreed to protect operational security and sensitive information. But there's no classification that covers criminal activity. There's no national security exemption for theft and murder." Brennan's face went rigid. Claire kept talking, words tumbling out fast before anyone could stop her. "Colonel Richard Brennan systematically diverted medical supplies from field hospitals in Kandahar province between 2018 and 2020. Medications, surgical equipment, blood products. He sold them on black markets while soldiers and civilians died because we didn't have the resources to save them. 14 patients that I know of. Probably more." "That's classified," Brennan started. "Their names aren't classified. Amira Hassan, 19 years old, died on my operating table because we didn't have the antibiotics we needed. Sergeant James Porter bled out because we'd run out of O-negative blood that was supposed to be in our inventory. Corporal, Agent Crawford, silence her!" Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. But Crawford didn't move. She stood there, hand on her sidearm, watching this play out with the expression of someone who'd just realized she was standing in the middle of something much bigger than a simple arrest. The cameras kept rolling. Claire kept talking. "When I started documenting the supply shortages, when I started asking questions about where our resources were going, Colonel Brennan initiated an investigation into me. He falsified my service record. He blamed me for deaths that happened because of his crimes. And when I was discharged, he made sure I could never talk about what I'd seen." "You have no proof," Brennan said, but his voice had lost its edge. I have supply requisition forms signed by you. I have financial records showing discrepancies. I have witness statements from other medical personnel. And I have the service records you altered, both the real ones and the fake ones you inserted into the system. Claire's voice went quiet, deadly calm. You made one mistake, Colonel. You assumed I'd stay buried, but yesterday, when your son came through my trauma bay dying, I didn't think about my career or your threats, or 3 years of hiding. I thought about saving his life, because that's what I was trained to do. That's who I am. And that's exactly what you tried to destroy in Kandahar when I wouldn't look the other way while you let people die for profit. The silence that followed was absolute. Then one of the Senate staffers stepped forward, holding up a credential. Colonel Brennan, I'm here representing Senator Catherine Morrison, chair of the Armed Services Committee. She's formally requesting your appearance before the committee to address these allegations. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Brennan's attorney whispered something urgent in his ear. Another staffer spoke up. Senator David Park, Appropriations Committee, has also requested testimony. There will be a full investigation into military medical supply chains and theater operations. The reporters were shouting questions now, a wall of noise. Brennan looked at Claire, at the cameras, at his carefully constructed future crumbling in real time on courthouse steps. This woman is mentally unstable, he said, but even he seemed to know how weak it sounded now. Then testify, Claire shot back. Under oath, in front of Congress. Explain why your son is alive this morning. Explain the supply records. Explain why my service file has 2 different versions. Explain all of it. Brennan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Agent Crawford's radio crackled again. She listened, then looked at Brennan with something approaching sympathy. Colonel, I've just been informed that the Department of Defense Inspector General's office has opened an investigation into allegations of misconduct related to medical supply management in deployed environments. You're being asked to make yourself available for questioning. The cameras captured it all, the moment a decorated colonel realized he'd been outmaneuvered by the woman he'd tried to erase. Brennan turned without another word and walked back to his SUV. His attorney followed, already on his phone. The vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared into morning traffic. Claire stood on the courthouse steps, hands still cuffed, surrounded by cameras and reporters and the wreckage of 3 years of silence finally breaking open. Crawford stepped beside her. You still need to come with me. The charges against you are real, and they'll need to be addressed in court. I know. But for what it's worth, Crawford's voice dropped so only Claire could hear. I think you just ended a very bad man's career. They led her inside the courthouse, cameras following until the doors closed. But the story was out now, spreading across news channels, social media, Senate offices. The truth that Colonel Richard Brennan had spent 3 years and countless resources trying to bury had just been shouted from courthouse steps in front of witnesses who couldn't be intimidated or silenced. Claire sat in a holding cell, waiting for arraignment, and felt the weight she'd carried since Kandahar finally started to lift. Then her attorney arrived, a woman Voss had arranged, sharp-eyed and expensive-looking, and said 5 words that changed everything. Lieutenant Brennan just woke up, and he's talking. The attorney's name was Jessica Brenner. No relation to the colonel, she'd made that clear immediately. And she stood in the holding cell doorway with the kind of intensity that meant bad news was about to get complicated. What's he saying? Claire asked. Everything. Jessica stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Lieutenant Brennan regained consciousness 40 minutes ago. Neurosurgery says his cognitive function is intact. First thing he did was ask what happened. Second thing he did was ask who saved his life. When they told him it was you, he requested to speak with investigators immediately. Claire's pulse kicked up. Investigators about what? About his parachute malfunction. Apparently it wasn't an accident. Jessica pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Claire. Lieutenant Brennan told Army CID that someone tampered with his reserve chute. The primary failed on deployment. That's documented in the incident report. But the reserve should have deployed automatically, so according to him, someone deliberately sabotaged the backup release mechanism. The words landed like physical blows. Claire stared at the tablet showing official Army Criminal Investigation Division notes, timestamps less than an hour old. His father tried to kill him. That's the implication Lieutenant Brennan is making, yes. But he's being careful. He's not directly accusing his father. He's saying someone with detailed knowledge of military parachute systems accessed his equipment before the training jump. Someone who knew exactly how to make it look like equipment failure rather than sabotage. Claire's mind raced through the implications. If Brennan was willing to kill his own son to stop me from testifying, then he's desperate and dangerous and completely exposed. Jessica sat down on the holding cell bench. CID has already seized all equipment related to the jump. They're running forensics now. If they find evidence of tampering, this goes from a corruption case to attempted murder of a military officer. Does Brennan know his son is talking? Not yet. He's been in emergency meetings with his attorneys since the courthouse. But he will soon, and when he does, Jessica's expression went hard. He's going to realize his only remaining play is to discredit his son's testimony before it destroys him. The holding cell suddenly felt smaller. Claire stood, pacing the narrow space. What's my status? Arraignment is in 2 hours. Judge Hendricks, federal court. The charges are practicing medicine without proper credentials, fraud, and a new addition courtesy of the FBI. Obstruction of justice for fleeing arrest. Jessica held up a hand before Claire could respond. But here's where it gets interesting. The U.S. Attorney's Office called me 20 minutes ago. They want to offer you a deal. What kind of deal? You plead to a lesser charge, probably misdemeanor fraud. You agree to psychiatric evaluation. You serve 6 months supervised probation. And in exchange, you don't testify about Kandahar. You don't pursue any civil litigation against Colonel Brennan or the Department of Defense. You disappear quietly. Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. They're trying to silence me again. They're trying to make this go away before it becomes a national scandal. A decorated colonel facing criminal charges, his son nearly killed in a suspicious training accident, military medical corruption in active war zones. This is career-ending stuff for a lot of people beyond just Brennan. The Pentagon wants damage control. And if I refuse the deal, then they prosecute you to the fullest extent. They'll argue you're mentally unstable, that your accusations are delusions brought on by combat stress, that you endangered Lieutenant Brennan's life with unauthorized surgery. They'll parade expert witnesses. They'll dig into every aspect of your life since discharge. And they'll make sure that even if you get to testify about Kandahar, no one will believe a word you say. Claire stopped pacing. Through the small window in the cell door, she could see federal marshals moving through the corridor, clipboards in hand, the machinery of justice grinding forward whether she was ready or not. "What would you advise?" she asked quietly. Jessica met her eyes. "As your attorney, I'd advise you to take the deal. You avoid prison, you avoid a public trial that will destroy whatever's left of your reputation, and you get to walk away. And as a person?" "As a person?" Jessica's voice softened. "I'd say that plea deal is exactly what Colonel Brennan is counting on. Because if you take it, he survives. His confirmation hearing continues. The investigation into Kandahar gets buried in classified channels where no one can see it, and 14 people who died because of his crimes never get justice." She paused. "But that's not legal advice. That's just what I'd be thinking if I were in your position." Claire looked at her hands. The same hands that had sealed an artery 2 nights ago, that had drilled into a skull to save a life yesterday, that had tried to save Amir Hassan 3 years ago in a field hospital while supplies ran out and Colonel Brennan was somewhere counting his profits. "I'm not taking the deal," she said. Jessica nodded slowly. "Then we go to trial. And we fight." The arraignment was a media circus. The federal courthouse had been surrounded by news vans since dawn, cameras tracking every person who entered the building. Claire was brought in through a side entrance in handcuffs, flanked by marshals, but the courtroom itself was packed with reporters, military observers, and civilians who'd somehow gotten seats to watch. Judge Maria Hendricks was 60 years old with silver hair and the kind of face that had heard every lie and excuse ever invented. She looked over her reading glasses at Claire standing at the defendant's table. "Miss Whitmore, you're charged with unauthorized practice of medicine, fraudulent representation of credentials, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Jessica stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The government has requested remand without bail, citing flight risk. The assistant U.S. attorney, a man named Preston Walsh with a voice like gravel, stood immediately. "Your Honor, the defendant fled federal custody less than 24 hours ago. She's demonstrated clear willingness to evade law enforcement. She poses a significant flight risk." Jessica countered without missing a beat. Your Honor, my client didn't flee custody. She was never in custody when she left Portland. She voluntarily presented herself at the federal courthouse this morning to make a statement regarding criminal conduct by a senior military officer. The FBI arrived at her location, and she cooperated fully. There was no flight. She ran from federal agents at a coffee shop, Walsh shot back. She left a public location where she felt unsafe and went to a secondary location where she could consult with legal counsel. That's not fleeing arrest. That's exercising her constitutional rights. Judge Hendricks held up a hand. Enough. Miss Whitmore, do you have ties to the community? Claire spoke clearly. I've lived in Portland for 18 months, Your Honor. I work at Riverside General Hospital. I have an apartment lease, utility bills in my name, a nursing license issued by the state of Oregon. That license is currently under review, Walsh interjected. It's still valid until the review board makes a determination, Jessica said. Hendricks looked at the file in front of her for a long moment. Bail is set at $50,000, cash or bond. Defendant will surrender her passport and is restricted to Multnomah County pending trial. Next court date is, Your Honor, the government has additional information. Walsh's voice carried an edge now. Information that came to light within the last hour. Hendricks raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, Jr., the patient at the center of this case, has made statements to Army CID alleging that his military equipment was sabotaged prior to the training accident that resulted in his injuries. He's also suggested that his father, Colonel Richard Brennan, may have been involved in attempts to discredit Miss Whitmore. The government believes what exactly? Hendricks's tone had gone sharp. Walsh hesitated. Claire could see him doing the calculation in real time. How much to reveal? How much to hold back? The government believes there may be broader criminal activity involved in this case beyond the charges currently filed. We're requesting a delay in proceedings pending further investigation. Denied. This is a criminal arraignment, not a fishing expedition. Hendricks looked at Claire. Miss Whitmore, you're released on bail with the conditions stated. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Claire felt Jessica's hand on her arm, steadying her as the courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, the marshals moving to clear a path. They made it out through a side corridor and into a small attorney conference room where Jessica immediately pulled out her phone. Voss just texted, Senator Morrison wants to meet with you, today, before Brennan's confirmation hearing tomorrow. To what end? To get your testimony on record. If you're willing to testify before the Armed Services Committee, they can grant you immunity for any statements you make. It won't affect the criminal charges against you here, but it means Brennan can't use classification or national security to shut you down. Claire's head was spinning. 24 hours ago, she'd been a suspended nurse hiding in a cabin. Now she was out on bail, facing federal charges, and being asked to testify before Congress. When? 3 hours. Her office on Capitol Hill? Jessica was already typing. I can have you on a plane in 90 minutes. I'm restricted to Multnomah County, for court purposes. Congressional testimony is federal business. Different jurisdiction. We can argue the restriction doesn't apply. Jessica looked up. But Claire, you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't a hospital or a courthouse. This is the Senate. If you testify, you're going up against one of the most powerful institutions in the country. And Brennan has allies there, people who owe him favors, people who don't want this story coming out. I know. Do you? Because once you're under oath in front of cameras, there's no taking it back. Everything you say becomes public record. Every detail about Kandahar, about the patients who died, about your discharge, all of it gets aired in front of the entire country. And Brennan's attorneys will tear you apart. They'll bring up every mistake you ever made, every moment of doubt, every second of hesitation. They'll make you relive the worst day of your life, and then they'll argue it was your fault. Claire thought about Amir Hassan, about the 14 names she'd memorized, about 3 years of silence that had protected exactly no one. Book the flight, she said. The plane touched down at Reagan National at 4:17 p.m. A car was waiting, sent by Senator Morrison's office, black sedan with government plates, and a driver who didn't make small talk. They drove through D.C. traffic in silence, Claire watching the monument slide past the window, thinking about how many people had come to this city looking for justice and left with nothing. The Hart Senate office building loomed gray and imposing against the late afternoon sky. Security was tight, metal detectors, ID checks, staffers everywhere moving with the urgent purposelessness of people who worked in Power's ecosystem. Claire was escorted to a conference room on the fourth floor where Senator Catherine Morrison waited. Morrison was in her 60s, silver hair cut sharp, wearing a blue suit that probably cost more than Claire made in a month. She stood when Claire entered and extended her hand. "Captain Whitmore, thank you for coming." "I'm not a captain anymore." "You earned the rank. You don't lose it just because someone decided you were inconvenient." Morrison gestured to a chair. "Sit. We don't have much time. Colonel Brennan's confirmation hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m. If you're going to testify, I need to know exactly what you're going to say." Claire sat. Across the table, two other people, staffers, she assumed, had laptops open and were taking notes. "I'm going to tell the truth about Kandahar." "That's admirably simple, but the truth is complicated." Morrison pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I've spent the last 8 hours reviewing everything we could get our hands on regarding medical supply chains in Afghanistan between 2018 and 2020. There are irregularities, shipments that don't match requisitions, inventory discrepancies, financial transfers that don't quite add up, but nothing that directly proves Colonel Brennan was personally involved in theft or diversion. I have proof. Then I need to see it, now. Because if you get up in front of my committee tomorrow and make accusations you can't back up, Brennan's attorneys will destroy you. And more importantly, they'll destroy the credibility of this investigation. Every other case of military corruption, every other whistleblower, every other soldier who tries to come forward, they'll all be that much easier to dismiss because we couldn't make the case stick against Brennan." Claire pulled out her phone. The documents Voss had given her had been uploaded to an encrypted cloud account. She opened it and turned the screen toward Morrison. "These are supply requisition forms from Forward Operating Base Kandahar, 2019, signed by Colonel Brennan. They show requests for medical supplies, antibiotics, surgical equipment, blood products. Now look at the delivery confirmations. The supplies were shipped. They arrived at the base, but they never made it to the field hospitals." Morrison's staffer leaned in, fingers flying over his laptop as he cross-referenced the documents. "Where did they go?" "That's the question I started asking 3 years ago. I tracked shipping manifests, checked inventory logs, interviewed supply personnel. The materials were being diverted to a secondary storage facility off base, a civilian contractor warehouse, and from there," Claire swiped to another document, "they were being sold to black market medical suppliers." Morrison's expression didn't change, but her eyes had gone sharp. "Can you prove Brennan authorized the diversion?" "I can prove he signed the transfer orders. I can prove he had financial ties to the civilian contractor. And I can prove that 14 patients died in my surgical unit alone because we didn't have the supplies these documents say we should have had." The room went quiet except for the sound of typing. Morrison finally spoke. "This is enough to open a formal investigation. Maybe enough to derail his confirmation. But Captain, you need to understand something. The moment you testify to this tomorrow, you become a target, not just from Brennan, but from everyone who benefits from keeping military corruption quiet. Defense contractors, senior officers, politicians who've been taking campaign donations from the companies involved. They will come after you with everything they have. They've already tried. No, they've tried to silence you quietly. Tomorrow, if you do this, they'll try to destroy you publicly. Your service record, your personal life, every decision you've ever made, it all becomes ammunition. And they'll use it." Claire met her eyes. "Senator, with respect, I've spent 3 years being quiet. It didn't protect me. It didn't protect the people who died. And it didn't stop Brennan. So if the choice is between being destroyed publicly while telling the truth or being destroyed quietly while staying silent, I'll take the public option." Morrison smiled slightly. "Voss said you had spine. She wasn't wrong." She closed the folder. "All right, you'll testify tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I'm putting you on first, right after opening statements. That gives Brennan's team less time to prepare a response. You'll be under oath. Answer every question directly and completely. Don't speculate. Don't editorialize. Just state what you know and what you can prove." "What about the criminal charges in Portland?" "That's outside my jurisdiction. But I can tell you that if your testimony leads to a credible investigation into Brennan, The U.S. Attorney's Office is going to have a harder time prosecuting you for saving his son's life. Morrison stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the longest day of your life. Claire didn't rest. She spent the night in a hotel room near the Capitol, going over her testimony, checking and rechecking the documents on her phone, thinking through every question Morrison's committee might ask, and every attack Brennan's attorneys would make. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and just sat by the window, watching DC's lights blur in the darkness. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. You still have time to walk away. Last chance. RB. She deleted it without responding. At 7:30 a.m., she met Jessica in the hotel lobby. Her attorney looked like she'd slept about as much as Claire had. Ready? Jessica asked. No. Good. People who feel ready usually aren't. Jessica handed her a coffee. Remember, short answers, direct statements, no emotional appeals. The documents speak for themselves. You're just there to authenticate them and provide context. They arrived at the Hart Building at 8:45. The hallways were already packed with media, staffers, observers. News of Claire's testimony had leaked, probably intentionally by Morrison's office, and the confirmation hearing had turned into must-watch television. Claire was escorted to a waiting room where she could see a monitor showing the hearing room filling up. At 8:57, a staffer appeared at the door. Captain Whitmore, you're up. The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room was exactly what Claire had imagined. Wood paneling, high ceilings, senators arranged in a semicircle on an elevated platform, witness table front and center under lights that made everything feel exposed. The gallery was packed, cameras lined the back wall. Claire was sworn in, her right hand raised, her voice steady as she promised to tell the truth. Senator Morrison leaned into her microphone. Captain Whitmore, thank you for appearing before this committee. I understand you have information relevant to Colonel Richard Brennan's nomination for Deputy Surgeon General. Yes, Senator. Please proceed. Claire took a breath and began. She spoke for 20 minutes without interruption, laying out everything she knew about Kandahar in clinical, precise detail. The supply requisitions, the diversions, the missing inventory, the patients who died. She named names: Amir Hassan, Sergeant James Porter, Corporal Linda Vasquez, 12 others. She entered the documents into the record. She explained how she'd tried to report the discrepancies through proper channels and how Colonel Brennan had initiated an investigation into her instead. The room was absolutely silent. When she finished, Morrison nodded. Thank you, Captain. Now members of the committee may have questions. Senator David Park, a hawk-faced man from Texas, spoke first. Captain Whitmore, you were discharged from the Army 3 years ago following an investigation into patient death. Is that correct? Yes, Senator. And that discharge was characterized as honorable, but it followed allegations of negligence in your surgical procedures, correct? The allegations were false, Senator. They were fabricated to discredit me after I reported the supply diversions. But you were investigated. There was an official inquiry. Are you saying the entire Army investigative apparatus was wrong? I'm saying the investigation was compromised by the person who had the most to lose from the truth coming out. Park leaned back. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence of this compromise? I have 2 versions of my service record, Senator. The original shows exemplary performance reviews and no disciplinary actions. The falsified version shows a pattern of negligence and insubordination. Both are currently in Army personnel databases. That's not a clerical error. That's deliberate falsification. Another senator, a woman from California named Torres, spoke up. Captain, you performed emergency surgery on Lieutenant Marcus Brennan 2 days ago. Is that correct? I performed a burr hole decompression to relieve intracranial pressure. Yes. Without proper civilian credentials. Without current hospital privileges? Yes. But I am a trained surgeon. I performed a life-saving procedure because the alternative was letting a patient die while waiting for authorization. And you knew Lieutenant Brennan was Colonel Brennan's son when you operated? Claire paused. This was a trap question. She could feel it. I knew after the fact, yes. Some might suggest that's a conflict of interest. Operating on the son of a man you're accusing of crimes. Some might suggest that saving a life is more important than politics, Senator. The gallery actually murmured at that. Morrison suppressed a smile. Senator Park wasn't done. Captain, You've accused a distinguished officer of serious crimes, but you've also admitted to practicing medicine without proper credentials, to fleeing federal custody, to making statements that could be seen as delusional given your PTSD diagnosis. How do we know any of what you're saying is true and not the product of mental instability? Claire's hands clenched under the table. Here it was, the attack she'd been expecting. Senator, I don't have a PTSD diagnosis. That's another falsification in my record. But even if I did, it wouldn't change the facts. The supply records are real. The financial transfers are documented. The patients who died are dead. Those things happened regardless of my mental state. But your interpretation of those facts is backed by 3 years of investigation by former Defense Intelligence Agency personnel who have no mental health issues and no personal stake in this case. Claire leaned forward slightly. Senator, you can question my credibility all you want, but the documents don't lie. The money trail doesn't lie. And the 14 people who died in Kandahar don't lie. Park started to respond, but Morrison cut him off. The chair recognizes Senator Bradford. An older man from Virginia, Bradford looked at Claire with something approaching sympathy. Captain, in your professional medical opinion, were the deaths you've described preventable? Yes, Senator. All of them? Most of them. Not all. Some patients had injuries that would have been fatal regardless. But Amir Hassan, Sergeant Porter, Corporal Vasquez, and at least 7 others, yes. They were preventable if we'd had the supplies we were supposed to have. And you're certain those supplies were diverted rather than simply delayed or lost in the logistics chain? I'm certain they arrived at the base and never reached us. Where they went after that, the documents show a pattern consistent with deliberate diversion for profit. Bradford nodded slowly. Thank you, Captain. The questioning continued for another 40 minutes. Some senators were hostile, some skeptical, a few sympathetic. Claire answered every question the same way, direct, factual, backed by documentation. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just stated the truth over and over until even the hostile senators started to run out of ways to attack it. Finally, Morrison called a recess. We'll reconvene in 1 hour to hear from Colonel Brennan. Captain Whitmore, you're dismissed. Thank you for your testimony. Claire stood on shaking legs and walked out of the hearing room. The gallery erupted as soon as she cleared the doors. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, staffers trying to maintain order. Jessica grabbed her arm and pulled her into a side corridor. You did good, Jessica said. Really good. You didn't give them anything they could use against you. Claire leaned against the wall, adrenaline finally crashing. What happens now? Now they question Brennan, and we see if he can explain away what you just put on record. They found a conference room with a monitor and watched the hearing resume. Colonel Richard Brennan entered in full dress uniform, medals gleaming, walking with the confidence of someone who'd spent a career winning battles. He was sworn in. Senator Morrison wasted no time. Colonel Brennan, you've just heard Captain Whitmore's testimony regarding medical supply diversions in Kandahar province between 2018 and 2020. What is your response? Brennan's voice was steady, almost bored. Senator, I respect Captain Whitmore's service, but her testimony today confirms what I've known for 3 years. She's suffering from undiagnosed and untreated combat stress. Her accusations are the product of a troubled mind trying to make sense of the senseless tragedy of war. Are you saying the supply records she presented are false? I'm saying her interpretation of those records is flawed. Medical logistics in a war zone are complex. Supplies get delayed, rerouted, used for different purposes than originally intended. Captain Whitmore saw discrepancies, and instead of understanding the complexity of military supply chains, she constructed a conspiracy theory. Morrison held up one of Claire's documents. This is a transfer order with your signature, Colonel. It authorized the movement of medical supplies to a civilian contractor warehouse. Can you explain that? Certainly. That warehouse was used for temporary storage when our on-base facilities were at capacity, standard protocol. And can you explain why those supplies never made it from that warehouse to the field hospitals that requisitioned them? Some did. Some were redirected to other units with more urgent needs. Again, standard wartime logistics. Senator Park jumped in. Senator Morrison, with respect, I think we're seeing exactly what Colonel Brennan described. A misunderstanding of complex military operations being twisted into baseless accusations by someone who, frankly, doesn't have the full picture. Claire watched the monitor, her hands clenched into fists. Brennan was good. He had answers for everything. Plausible deniability wrapped in military jargon and delivered with absolute confidence. Then Morrison played her trump card. Colonel, were you aware that your son, Lieutenant Marcus Brennan Jr., has made statements to Army CID alleging that his parachute equipment was sabotaged prior to his training accident? Brennan's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I was not aware of that, Senator. He suggested that someone with detailed knowledge of military parachute systems deliberately tampered with his reserve chute. Do you have any knowledge of who might have done such a thing? None whatsoever. My son suffered a tragic accident. If he's suggesting otherwise, he may be experiencing confusion related to his head injury. The Army doesn't seem to think it's confusion. They've opened a criminal investigation. The hearing room stirred. Cameras focused tighter on Brennan. Morrison continued, her voice sharp now. Colonel, isn't it true that your son's accident occurred less than 12 hours after Captain Whitmore performed a life-saving procedure on another patient? A procedure that drew attention to her skills and background. A procedure that threatened to expose the very cover story you'd built around her discharge. Senator, I have no idea what you're implying. I'm implying that someone tried to kill your son to prevent him from being saved by the one person who could expose your crimes, and that someone had the means, motive, and opportunity to do exactly that. Brennan stood abruptly. This is outrageous. I would never— Sit down, Colonel. Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. You're under oath, and you're not dismissed. The room was pandemonium now. Senators shouting, staffers rushing, cameras capturing every second. Brennan sat slowly, his face ashen. Then the hearing room doors burst open. 2 Army CID agents in uniform walked straight to the witness table, flanked by federal marshals. The lead agent spoke clearly. Colonel Richard Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a military officer, theft of government property, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. The rest of the Miranda warning was drowned out by the roar of the gallery. Claire watched through the monitor as handcuffs were placed on Colonel Brennan's wrists, as he was led out of the Senate hearing room in front of every camera in America, as 3 years of silence finally, brutally, loudly ended. Jessica was on her phone immediately, listening, then turned to Claire with wide eyes. CID found the evidence. Someone tampered with Lieutenant Brennan's parachute, and they found a paper trail, messages, financial transfers, linking the sabotage back to a contractor your colonel used in Kandahar. Same contractor who ran the warehouse where supplies disappeared. Claire couldn't speak. It gets better, Jessica continued. The U.S. attorney in Portland just dropped all charges against you. Insufficient evidence to prosecute given new information about Colonel Brennan's criminal activity. You're clear. Claire sat down heavily. The monitor showed chaos, senators scrambling, media swarming, the empty witness chair where a colonel had sat minutes before. Her phone buzzed. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan Jr. had sent a message through the hospital. Thank you for saving my life. And for having the courage I didn't. I'm testifying against my father. Full cooperation, whatever it takes. Claire closed her eyes. 3 years ago, she'd watched Amir Hassan die and thought the truth didn't matter. That power always won. The justice was just a word people used to feel better about systems that protected the guilty and buried the innocent. She'd been wrong. The truth mattered because people like Rachel Voss and Senator Morrison and Lieutenant Brennan decided it mattered. Because they fought for it when fighting seemed impossible. Because they refused to stay silent even when silence was safer. Jessica touched her shoulder. Claire, there are reporters outside who want a statement. What do you want to say? Claire thought about 14 names, about field hospitals and missing supplies and all the lies that had kept a guilty man free. Tell them I said exactly what I came here to say, the truth, and tell them it's not over until everyone who helped Brennan answers for it. She stood and walked toward the corridor where cameras waited. Behind her, the monitor showed breaking news. Deputy Surgeon General nominee arrested on multiple charges. Congressional investigation expanded to military supply chain corruption. Claire pushed open the door to face the media storm, and somewhere in a hospital room, a young lieutenant who'd almost died to keep his father's secrets was telling investigators everything he knew. The dominoes were falling. But in a Pentagon conference room 200 miles away, Four men in expensive suits watched the news coverage with expressions that promised this fight was far from finished. One of them picked up a phone and dialed. Brennan's compromised. Initiate damage control protocol. And find out everything there is to know about Claire Whitmore. Everything. I don't care what it costs or who we have to go through. She just declared war on the entire defense procurement system. He hung up and smiled. Let's see how long she survives it. The Pentagon conference room went dark, except for the glow of monitors showing news coverage. The four men who'd watched Colonel Brennan's arrest didn't look panicked. They looked surgical. The one who'd made the call was named Victor Carson, 58 years old, CEO of Titan Defense Solutions, the civilian contractor that had run the Kandahar warehouse. His company held $7 billion in active Department of Defense contracts. His lobbyists had offices 2 blocks from the Capitol, and his quarterly profit margins depended on no one looking too closely at how materials moved through war zones. Brennan was sloppy, Carson said quietly, trying to kill his own son, leaving paper trails. Amateur mistakes. The man next to him, Daniel Frost, former 3-star general turned defense industry consultant, nodded. Question is how much he'll give up under interrogation. If he points at our contract arrangements, he won't. He's smarter than that. He knows if he implicates Titan, we implicate 20 other officers who took the same deals. Mutually assured destruction keeps everyone quiet. Except for the girl, the third man said. Gregory Walsh, brother to the assistant U.S. attorney who'd tried to prosecute Claire. She's already testified, she's already on record, and Senator Morrison is using her as the face of military corruption reform. Every news outlet in America is running her story. Carson smiled. Then we don't attack her credibility anymore. We've tried that. It failed. Instead, we make her irrelevant. How? By giving the public what it wants. A villain arrested, hearings held, reforms announced. We let Brennan burn. We cooperate fully with investigations. We demonstrate that the system works, that bad actors get caught, that justice prevails. Carson stood and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac. And while everyone's celebrating Claire Whitmore's brave testimony, we quietly restructure our contracts, move the operations offshore, and make sure the next iteration is invisible to people like her. Frost leaned back. What about the expanded congressional investigation Morrison mentioned? If they start auditing defense procurement across the board, be sure. They won't get that far. Morrison has political capital now, but she's one senator. We have 50 senators who depend on defense industry donations for their campaigns. We activate them. We slow-walk document production. We claim national security concerns. We tie everything up in classified review processes that take years to resolve. Carson turned from the window. By the time any real investigation gets traction, Carson turned from the Claire Whitmore will be old news and Morrison will be focused on her re-election campaign. Wogo Bashimas. The fourth man, who hadn't spoken yet, finally did. His name was Thomas Ridley, and he worked in a Pentagon office, so classified it didn't appear on any organizational chart. There's another problem. Lieutenant Brennan is cooperating with CID. He has direct knowledge of his father's activities. And unlike Claire Whitmore, he's active duty military with unimpeachable credentials. He's also recovering from traumatic brain injury, Carson said. Memory issues, confusion, emotional instability. If his testimony becomes problematic, there are medical avenues to discredit it. You're talking about destroying a decorated officer's career. I'm talking about protecting a system that keeps this country's defense industry functioning. Lieutenant Brennan is one person. The contracts we manage employ 200,000 people and fund critical military capabilities. Which matters more? No one answered. They didn't have to. Carson checked his watch. Gentlemen, we have work to do. Frost, coordinate with our Senate contacts. Walsh, make sure your brother understands that any further prosecution related to this case should be minimal and quiet. Ridley, I need someone inside the CID investigation feeding us information on what Brennan's actually telling them, and I'll handle media strategy. He paused. Claire Whitmore thinks she won today. Let's make sure winning doesn't feel like she hoped it would. 3,000 miles away, Claire stood in front of a wall of cameras outside the Hart Senate building and gave the statement she'd been preparing since dawn. My name is Claire Whitmore. 3 years ago, I was a captain in the United States Army Medical Corps serving in Afghanistan. I reported supply chain corruption that led to patient deaths. Instead of investigating my allegations, the military destroyed my career to protect the guilty. Today, the truth finally came out. But this isn't over. Colonel Brennan was one person in a system that allowed his crimes to continue for years. Until that system changes, until everyone involved is held accountable, the fight isn't finished. The reporters erupted with questions. Claire answered a few. Yes, she'd been cleared of charges in Portland. No, she didn't know what would happen to Brennan. Yes, she planned to continue cooperating with investigations, and then Jessica pulled her away to a waiting car. They drove in silence for several minutes before Jessica spoke. You just made yourself a permanent target. You know that, right? I know. Brennan's the visible piece. But defense contracting corruption runs deep. You're threatening billions of dollars and careers that depend on that money staying invisible. These people don't just go away because one colonel got arrested. Claire stared out the window at DC traffic. So what do? They make you toxic. They plant stories questioning your motives. They find every mistake you've ever made and amplify it. They wait for you to slip up, say something they can twist, make a decision they can attack, and then they destroy you with your own words. Jessica's voice was tired. I've seen it happen to whistleblowers 100 times. You win the battle, you get the headlines, and then 6 months later you're unemployable, isolated, and wondering if telling the truth was worth it. It was worth it. Ask me that again in 6 months. Claire's phone had been buzzing non-stop since the hearing ended. Messages from reporters, from advocacy groups, from people she'd served with in Afghanistan. One message stood out, from Dr. Marcus Thornhill at Riverside General. We need to talk. Come back to Portland. Please. She showed it to Jessica. Could be a trap, Jessica said. Could be an apology. You're an optimist. I'm a realist who just watched a colonel get arrested on live television. I'll take my chances. They flew back to Portland that evening. Claire had expected media at the airport, but security had cleared the terminal, and she made it to Jessica's car without incident. The drive to Riverside General took 20 minutes through evening traffic, the city lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets. Thornhill was waiting in his office, the same office where he'd suspended her 4 days ago. He looked like he'd aged a year since then. Claire, sit. She sat. Jessica remained standing by the door. Thornhill rubbed his face. I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I suspended you based on incomplete information. I questioned your credentials when I should have been questioning the system that forced you to hide them. And I let Colonel Brennan intimidate me into removing you from his son's care when you were the only reason that kid survived. Apology accepted. I'm also offering you your job back, full reinstatement, no probation, and a formal commendation for your actions, saving both Private Ramsey and Lieutenant Brennan. Claire blinked. Just like that? The hospital board met this afternoon. Your testimony before Congress made national news. Senator Morrison's office called personally to recommend you. And frankly, having a decorated combat surgeon on staff is better for our reputation than whatever concerns we had about your suspension. Thornhill leaned forward. But I'm not just offering you a nursing position. I'm offering you a trauma surgery fellowship. Full training, full credentials, path to attending physician. The offer hung in the air. Jessica stepped forward. What's the catch? No catch. The hospital wants to do the right thing, and this is it. Thornhill looked at Claire. You saved 2 lives in this building while technically suspended and facing federal charges. Imagine what you could do with proper support. Claire felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just exhaustion finally lifting. I need to think about it. Take your time. But Claire, the offer won't be available forever. Media attention fades. Right now you're a hero. In a month you'll be yesterday's news. This is your window to rebuild your career on your terms. She left Thornhill's office with more questions than answers. In the parking garage, Jessica turned to her. You're not seriously considering turning that down. I don't know what I'm considering. Claire, they're offering you everything you lost 3 years ago. Medical career, credentials, respect. Why would you hesitate? Because 3 years ago, I thought working within the system would protect me. It didn't, and now they're asking me to trust that same system again. Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted. We have a problem. Senator Morrison's office just sent this. She turned her phone screen toward Claire. It showed a news article from a conservative political website. Military corruption. Whistleblower's troubled past raises questions. The article detailed Claire's discharge, her missing employment gaps, her suspension from Riverside General. It quoted unnamed military sources suggesting she'd been unreliable in Afghanistan, that her accusations against Brennan stemmed from personal conflicts rather than actual corruption, that her PTSD had never been properly treated. "This is Carson," Jessica said quietly, "or someone like him. They're starting the character assassination." Claire read the article twice. Every fact was technically accurate, but presented to make her look unstable, vindictive, damaged. The kind of story that wouldn't change anyone's mind who already believed her, but would give ammunition to anyone looking for reasons to dismiss her testimony. How do we fight this? We don't. Responding to this kind of thing just amplifies it. We ignore it and hope it doesn't gain traction. But the article wasn't alone. Over the next 48 hours, more appeared. A military blog questioning her surgical competence. A Twitter thread from an account claiming to have served with her, describing her as reckless and insubordinate. A think tank report suggesting that military whistleblowers often suffered from cognitive biases that led them to see conspiracies where none existed. None of it was overtly false. All of it was designed to erode trust. Claire watched it happen from her apartment, her phone buzzing with interview requests from journalists who wanted her response, her email filling with messages from both supporters and people calling her a traitor. The line between hero and villain was thinner than she'd imagined. On the third day after her testimony, Rachel Voss called. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." The smear campaign will get worse before it gets better. They're testing which narratives stick. Mental health angle, competence questions, personal vendetta theories. Once they find what works, they'll double down. Great. But there's good news. The CID investigation into Brennan has expanded. They're looking at financial records for Titan Defense Solutions, examining other officers who worked with him in Afghanistan, interviewing soldiers who served under his command. It's real, and it's moving fast. How fast? Indictments within 2 weeks. Not just Brennan, they're building cases against at least 4 other officers and 2 civilian contractors. This could be the biggest military corruption prosecution in a decade. Claire felt a flicker of something, vindication maybe. What do they need from me? More testimony. Depositions for the criminal cases. Maybe trial testimony if it goes that far. You need to be ready to relive Kandahar in detail. Every patient, every supply shortage, every conversation with Brennan. They're going to make you prove it all over again. I can do that. I know you can. But Claire, these people are going to fight back, and they have resources you can't imagine. Be careful. That night, Claire's apartment building lost power. The entire block went dark at 11 p.m. She called the utility company and was told there was no outage reported in her area. When power came back on 20 minutes later, her laptop was missing from her kitchen table. She called the police. They took a report but pointed out there was no sign of forced entry, nothing else taken, no evidence of a break-in. Probably just misplaced the laptop, the officer suggested. Claire knew better. The laptop had contained copies of all her documents on Kandahar, encrypted, backed up to the cloud. But still, someone wanted to know what she had. Someone wanted to send a message that nowhere was safe. She called Jessica, who arrived within 30 minutes. "You're staying at my place tonight. Pack a bag." "I'm not running again." "You're not running. You're being smart. Whoever did this wanted you to know they can get to you. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you scared." Claire packed a bag and left. Jessica's condo was in a secure building downtown with cameras and a doorman. They spent the night going through everything Claire had saved: documents, photos, testimony notes, making sure nothing was lost, nothing was compromised. At 3 a.m., Claire's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Captain Whitmore?" A young voice, male, nervous. "Who is this?" "My name is Derek Foster. I was a supply sergeant at FOB Kandahar in 2019. I worked with Colonel Brennan, and I need to tell someone what I know before they come after me too." Claire put the phone on speaker so Jessica could hear. "What do you know, Sergeant Foster?" "I helped move the supplies, the ones that got diverted." I didn't understand what was happening at first. Brennan just said we were consolidating inventory, moving things to more secure storage. But after a few months, I realized the materials weren't coming back. They were disappearing, and when I asked questions, Brennan threatened me. Said if I talked, I'd be charged with theft. Said he had documentation showing I'd signed off on the transfers, which made me complicit. Do you still have any of that documentation? I kept copies. Not all of it, but enough. Shipping manifests, transfer orders, some financial records I found when I was cleaning out a filing cabinet before we rotated out. I've been sitting on this stuff for 3 years, too scared to come forward, but after I saw your testimony on TV, his voice cracked. Ma'am, people died because of what we did. I was part of it. I need to make it right. Claire met Jessica's eyes. This was it, corroborating evidence from someone inside the operation. Sergeant, where are you right now? I'm in Virginia, Fort Belvoir. I'm still active duty. I want to talk to CID, but I'm scared they'll just arrest me and bury my testimony to protect the investigation. They won't, but you need protection, legal representation. Claire looked at Jessica, who was already typing on her phone. Jessica spoke up. Sergeant Foster, my name is Jessica Brenner. I'm Captain Whitmore's attorney. I can connect you with a military defense lawyer who specializes in whistleblower cases. He'll make sure your testimony gets heard without you being used as a scapegoat. But you need to move fast. If Brennan's people know you're talking, they already do. My apartment was broken into yesterday. Nothing taken, but someone went through my files. I've been staying with a friend since then. Get to Fort Belvoir JAG office first thing in the morning. Ask for Captain Rodriguez. Tell him Jessica Brenner sent you and that you have information about the Brennan investigation. He'll take it from there. Yes, ma'am. And Captain Whitmore, thank you for being brave enough to start this. I should have spoken up 3 years ago. You're speaking up now. That's what matters. The call ended. Jessica immediately contacted the military defense attorney, gave him the heads up, then turned to Claire. This changes everything. Foster's testimony puts someone else inside Brennan's operation, someone who can verify the mechanics of how supplies were diverted. CID is going to love this. If he makes it to JAG safely. He will. Rodriguez is solid. He'll protect him. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against something bigger than they understood. Brennan's arrest had been satisfying, dramatic, public. But the people behind him, Carson and whoever else had built their fortunes on military corruption, those people were still out there, still planning, still dangerous. The next morning, Claire woke to her phone exploding with notifications. She checked the news and her stomach dropped. Military whistleblower found dead in apparent suicide. The article showed a photo of Sergeant Derek Foster. According to Fort Belvoir authorities, Foster had been found in his apartment at 6 a.m. by his roommate. Single gunshot wound to the head. A note was recovered suggesting depression and guilt over his role in Afghanistan. No signs of foul play. Claire read it 3 times, feeling cold spread through her chest. Jessica. Her attorney appeared from the kitchen, saw Claire's face, and took the phone. Read the article. Her expression went hard. He called us at 3 a.m. He was ready to testify. He was scared but determined. Jessica's voice shook. And now he's dead with a suicide note 8 hours later. They killed him. We don't know that. Yes, we do. You know it. I know it. Anyone who's paying attention knows it. Claire stood. He was going to corroborate everything. He had documents. He was inside the operation. And now he's gone and they're calling it suicide. Jessica was already on her phone calling someone. I need to report a suspicious death. Sergeant Derek Foster, Fort Belvoir. He contacted my client last night with information about an ongoing federal investigation into military corruption. Now he's dead. She listened. I understand it's under military jurisdiction. I'm saying the timing is suspicious, and someone needs to look at this as potential witness tampering, or worse. She hung up, frustrated. They're saying it's an active investigation, and they can't comment. Claire felt rage building, the same rage she'd felt watching Amir Hassan die, watching Brennan walk free for 3 years, watching the system protect itself at every turn. They're covering it up, right now, in real time. Foster reaches out to testify, and 8 hours later, he's dead with a convenient note. We need proof. We need to make enough noise that they can't bury this quietly. Claire grabbed her phone. I'm calling Morrison's office. This is exactly the kind of thing that proves the investigation needs to keep going. Senator Morrison's staffer answered on the second ring. Claire explained what happened. Foster's call, his promised testimony, his death. The staffer listened, promised to relay the information to the senator, and hung up with the kind of bureaucratic politeness that meant nothing would happen. Claire tried 3 journalists. 2 didn't answer. The third said they'd look into it, but warned that without evidence of foul play, a suicide at a military base wouldn't generate much coverage. She hung up and looked at Jessica. They're going to get away with this. Maybe. Or maybe CID is already looking at it. Maybe they're building a case and they can't show their hand yet. Or maybe Derek Foster just became another name on the list of people who died because they got in the way of profits. Jessica didn't have an answer for that. The media coverage of Foster's death was minimal. A brief mention in military news outlets, a paragraph in the Washington Post, nothing on the major networks. The story was that a troubled soldier dealing with PTSD and guilt had taken his own life. The note, which was never published but repeatedly referenced, apparently detailed his remorse over actions in Afghanistan. Claire knew what was happening. They were using Foster's death to reinforce the narrative that everyone involved in Kandahar was mentally unstable. Brennan was unstable. Claire was unstable. Foster was unstable. Not criminals, not whistleblowers, just damaged soldiers who couldn't handle the stress. 3 days after Foster's death, the Department of Defense Inspector General's office released a preliminary report on their investigation into medical supply management in Afghanistan. The report acknowledged irregularities in Colonel Brennan's supply requisitions, but found no systemic corruption in the broader defense procurement system. It recommended policy changes, better oversight, and additional training for logistics personnel. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic cover-up. Senator Morrison held a press conference condemning the report as inadequate and promising continued congressional oversight. But Claire could see the momentum shifting. The initial outrage was fading. Other news was taking over the cycle. The story was becoming old. She was sitting in Jessica's condo watching Morrison's press conference when her phone rang. Rachel Voss. Turn on C-SPAN. Why? Just do it. Claire switched channels. The screen showed a congressional hearing room. Senator Morrison sat at the center of the panel, and walking to the witness table flanked by attorneys was Victor Carson. Morrison's voice was ice. Mr. Carson, thank you for appearing before this committee. I understand Titan Defense Solutions has contracts with the Department of Defense totaling $7 billion across multiple theaters of operation. That's correct, Senator. And I understand you employed Colonel Richard Brennan as a contractor liaison during his service in Afghanistan. Carson's expression didn't change. Colonel Brennan coordinated with multiple civilian contractors in theater. Titan was one of many. Did you have a personal relationship with Colonel Brennan outside of professional capacity? We played golf occasionally, attended the same industry conferences, nothing unusual. Did you have financial arrangements with Colonel Brennan that went beyond standard contractor military liaison protocols? Absolutely not. All our arrangements were documented and approved through proper channels. Morrison held up a document. This is a wire transfer record showing $200,000 moving from a Titan subsidiary account to a private account registered to Colonel Brennan. Can you explain that? Carson barely glanced at it. I'd need to see the full documentation, but it's likely a consulting fee for post-service advisory work. Many retired officers work with defense contractors in consulting capacities. This transfer occurred while Colonel Brennan was still on active duty. Then it was likely for future contracted services. Again, I'd need to review the specifics. Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Carson, are you aware that the warehouse used to store diverted medical supplies in Kandahar was owned by a Titan subsidiary? We owned several storage facilities in theater. That was part of our logistics support contract. And are you aware that materials stored in that facility were never delivered to their intended military medical units? Senator, with respect, logistics in a war zone are complex. Materials get delayed, rerouted, used for different purposes than originally intended. I can't speak to specific incidents without reviewing detailed records. Claire watched Carson deflect every question with the smooth confidence of someone who'd been coached by expensive attorneys. He admitted nothing. He denied nothing directly. He just created enough ambiguity that nothing could stick. The hearing continued for 2 hours. Morrison hammered him with documents, with timelines, with financial records. Carson maintained his composure, never quite admitting wrongdoing, never quite denying it either. When it ended, Claire knew they hadn't gotten him. He'd weathered the storm. Her phone rang immediately. Morrison's staffer. Captain Whitmore, the senator would like to meet with you tomorrow. Can you be in D.C. by noon? Claire flew out that night. Morrison's office the next day felt different than before. Less optimistic. More resigned. He's untouchable, Morrison said without preamble. Carson has lawyers, political connections, and enough plausible deniability to avoid prosecution. The wire transfer to Brennan can be explained away as legitimate consulting fees. The warehouse is just one of dozens Titan operates. Nothing directly ties him to the supply diversions except circumstantial evidence. What about Foster's testimony? Foster's dead, and according to the official investigation, he left a note confessing to guilt over his role in Afghanistan. His death actually helps Carson's defense, shows that the people actually responsible were lower-level personnel who acted without corporate knowledge. Claire felt the walls closing in. So Brennan goes to prison and everyone above him walks away? Unless we find something more concrete and the DOD investigation just wrapped. They're not going to reopen it without new evidence. Morrison looked tired. I'm not giving up, but I need you to understand. We got Brennan. That's a win. That's justice for at least one person responsible. But the system that enabled him? That's bigger than one congressional investigation can dismantle. So what do? You rebuild your life. You take Thornhill's offer. You become the trauma surgeon you were trained to be. And maybe someday, when another case like this comes up, you'll be in a position to fight it with more resources and support. Morrison stood. I know that's not the answer you want, but it's the honest one. Claire left the meeting feeling hollowed out. She'd exposed Brennan. She'd testified before Congress. She'd done everything right. And the people who'd built their fortunes on corruption were still untouchable. She flew back to Portland and went directly to Riverside General. Thornhill's office was empty, but his assistant said he was in surgery. Claire waited. 3 hours later, he appeared, still in scrubs, exhausted. Claire, have you made a decision? I want the fellowship. I want to rebuild my career. I want to be the surgeon I was trained to be. Thornhill smiled. That's the right choice. When can you start? Monday. Done. He extended his hand. Welcome back, Dr. Whitmore. The title felt foreign, but also right. She was walking out of the hospital when her phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an unknown number. You did good work exposing Brennan, but you missed the bigger picture. Carson's protected because he has insurance, files documenting every transaction, every bribe, every officer he owns. He keeps it all in a private server at his estate in Maryland. If that server goes public, it doesn't just take down Carson. It takes down half the defense procurement apparatus. Thought you should know. A friend. Claire stared at the message. Then she forwarded it to Rachel Voss with 2 words. Can we? Voss's response came back in 30 seconds. Absolutely not. That's illegal surveillance. We'd be prosecuted. Claire typed back, what if someone else obtained it and gave it to us? A longer pause this time. Then, call me. Encrypted line. Claire stood in the hospital parking lot as rain started to fall and knew she was about to make a choice that would either finish what she'd started or destroy everything she'd just rebuilt. She made the call. Voss answered on the first ring. You're thinking about doing something extremely stupid. I'm thinking about finishing what we started. Claire walked to her car, rain soaking through her jacket. That message said Carson has files documenting every transaction, every officer he owns. If that's true, then it's protected by every security system money can buy, stored on private property, and obtaining it without a warrant would be illegal surveillance that would get us both arrested and make the evidence inadmissible in any court. Voss's voice was sharp. Claire, I know you want to take down the entire system, but there are lines even I won't cross. Someone crossed them to send me that message. Someone who wants you to commit a crime so they can discredit everything you've accomplished. This is a setup. Claire sat in her car, engine off, watching rain streak the windshield. What if it's not? What if someone inside Carson's operation is trying to do the right thing but can't come forward themselves? Then they should go to the FBI through proper channels. The FBI is already investigating. They found nothing that could stick to Carson. You heard Morrison. He's untouchable through normal means. Voss was quiet for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet, but I need to understand who sent this message and what they actually have. Can you trace it? Maybe. Send me the full message metadata. But Claire, Voss's tone shifted. Promise me you won't do anything until we know more. No midnight raids on Carson's estate. No vigilante hacking. Promise me. Claire hesitated. I promise. She hung up and forwarded the message details to Voss. Then she sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, thinking about Derek Foster's death, about Amira Hassan, about 14 names and how many more there might be in Carson's files. Her phone buzzed. Jessica. Where are you? You were supposed to meet me an hour ago. Claire had completely forgotten. Sorry, I got distracted. I'm at the hospital. Well, get undistracted and come to my office. We have a problem. Jessica's law office was downtown, 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. Claire arrived dripping wet and found her attorney pacing. The U.S. Attorney's Office just called. They want you to testify in Brennan's criminal trial. Grand jury proceedings start next week. That's good, right? It would be if they weren't also signaling that your testimony is the only substantial evidence they have. Everything else is circumstantial. If you can't definitively prove Brennan personally authorized the supply diversions and knew they were being sold rather than legitimately redirected, the case falls apart. Claire sat down heavily. I saw the transfer orders with his signature. I tracked the inventory discrepancies. I have witness statements from soldiers who are now either dead or too scared to testify. Foster's gone. The other medical personnel you mentioned? 2 have refused to cooperate, 1 recanted his statement, and the 4th is claiming memory issues related to combat stress. Jessica's frustration was visible. Brennan's attorneys are good. They're arguing he was a mid-level logistics coordinator who signed off on transfers authorized by superior officers, that he had no knowledge of what happened to supplies after they left military custody, that civilian contractors operated independently and any corruption happened without his awareness or involvement. That's a lie. Prove it. Because right now your testimony establishes that supplies went missing and people died. But it doesn't definitively prove Brennan personally profited or knowingly participated in the diversions. His lawyers will argue incompetence, systemic failures, wartime chaos, anything except criminal intent. Claire felt 3 years of work threatening to collapse. What do we need? We need someone who can testify to Brennan's direct involvement. Someone who saw money change hands, who heard him acknowledge the scheme, who has documentary evidence he can't explain away. Jessica pulled up a file on her laptop. The prosecution has Brennan's financial records showing deposits that don't match his military salary, but his lawyers claim those were legitimate consulting fees, speaking engagements, investment returns, without proof connecting those deposits to the supply diversions. Right? He walks. He gets a reduced sentence at best, maybe a few years for conduct unbecoming an officer. But the major charges? Conspiracy, theft of government property, accessory to negligent homicide? Those require proving intent and knowledge, and we don't have it. Claire's phone buzzed. Voss, call me. Now. Secure line. Claire excused herself and stepped into the hallway, used the encrypted app Voss had installed weeks ago. I traced the message, Voss said immediately. It came from inside Titan Defense Solutions, specifically from the personal device of Carson's executive assistant, woman named Lauren Mitchell, 42 years old, 12 years with the company. She has access to everything, Carson's calendar, his communications, his files. Why would she reach out to me? I did some digging. Her brother was Army, Corporal Nathan Mitchell, killed in Afghanistan in 2019. Officially, IED attack. But according to the after-action report I found, he bled out from a severable leg wound because the field hospital ran out of O-negative blood during surgery. Claire's chest tightened. He was one of the 14. He was number 7 on your list. Lauren Mitchell has spent 3 years watching the man responsible for her brother's death get richer and more powerful. And now she's watching him skate on corruption charges because no one can prove direct involvement. Can we contact her? No. Too dangerous for her. If Carson suspects his assistant is leaking information, she's dead or disappeared within hours, but Voss paused. She included coordinates in the message metadata, geographic location of Carson's private server. Where? His estate in Potomac, Maryland. The server's in a climate-controlled vault in his home office. According to property records and security filings, it's protected by biometric locks, motion sensors, and 24-hour private security. So it's impossible. For normal people, yes. But Lauren Mitchell has been feeding information to someone for the past 6 months. Someone who's been building a case against Carson independent of the official investigation. Who? Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, Jr. The name hit Claire like electricity. He's been investigating his father's partners. He's been investigating everyone. While recovering from his head injury, he started digging into every person his father worked with in Afghanistan. Carson, the Titan executives, the other officers involved. He's used his military credentials to access classified records, his family connections to get into social circles, and his father's arrest to justify his questions. And he's been compiling everything. Why hasn't he gone to authorities? Because he learned from his father's arrest. Going public too early gives targets time to destroy evidence and coordinate defenses. He's waiting until he has something airtight, and apparently he thinks Carson's server is the key. Claire walked back into Jessica's office. I need to go to Maryland. Jessica looked up sharply. Why? Because Lieutenant Brennan is planning something and I need to be there when it happens. Claire, no, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that kid almost died because his father tried to silence me. And now he's risking everything to finish the job. I'm not letting him do it alone. Jessica stood. If you're caught interfering with an investigation, breaking and entering, or illegally obtaining evidence, then I'm caught. But if we do nothing, Brennan gets a light sentence and Carson keeps operating. More people die. More families lose sons and daughters because someone decided profit matters more than lives. Claire met her attorney's eyes. You told me 6 months ago I'd be asking if telling the truth was worth it. I'm telling you now it is, even if it costs me everything. Jessica stared at her for a long moment. Then she grabbed her coat. I'm coming with you. Someone needs to document whatever happens for legal purposes, and you're going to need bail money if this goes sideways. They flew to D.C. that night. Voss met them at Reagan National with a rental car and grim expression. Lieutenant Brennan knows you're coming. Lauren Mitchell told him you received the message. He wants to meet before attempting anything. Where? Lincoln Memorial, midnight, very dramatic. Voss handed Claire a phone. Burner. Use it for all communications related to this. Your regular phone stays off. They drove through D.C. in silence, the monuments lit against the night sky like promises the city rarely kept. At 11:45, Claire walked up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial alone. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, Jr. stood by the statue's base, still moving stiffly from his injuries but upright and determined. Captain Whitmore. Lieutenant? They stood in the memorial's shadow, two people who'd nearly destroyed each other's lives and now shared the same enemy. Lauren Mitchell told me you got her message, Brennan said. I told her sending it was dangerous. She said she didn't care anymore, that her brother deserved justice even if it cost her everything. I understand that feeling. I know you do. That's why I asked you here. Brennan pulled out a tablet. I've spent 4 months building a complete map of my father's operation, every transaction, every partner, every diverted shipment, and it all points back to Carson. He wasn't just a contractor buying stolen supplies. He was the architect. He recruited my father. He set up the logistics. He created the shell companies that laundered the money. And he has documentation of all of it on that server because he's paranoid about his partners turning on him. Classic insurance. Mom. How do you know what's on the server? Because Lauren accessed it 3 weeks ago when Carson asked her to retrieve a file. She saw the directory structure. Folders labeled with officer names, contract numbers, transaction dates, everything organized like a corporation's filing system because that's what it is. A criminal enterprise run with corporate efficiency. Claire looked at the tablet showing blueprints of Carson's estate. You're planning to break in. I'm planning to execute a lawful search and seizure. I've been working with a federal prosecutor who specializes in defense contractor fraud. She's been building a case against Carson for 2 years but couldn't get enough for a warrant. Until now. Brennan swiped to another document. Lauren Mitchell has agreed to testify about what she saw on that server. That gives us probable cause. The prosecutor submitted a sealed warrant application 2 hours ago. Judge is reviewing it tonight. And if the judge approves, then at 0600 tomorrow, FBI agents execute the warrant and seize Carson's server. Everything on it becomes evidence. Every transaction, every name, every crime. Brennan met her eyes. But there's a problem. Carson has people inside the federal system, people who owe him favors, people who'll warn him the moment that warrant is signed. He'll have 6 hours to destroy the server before FBI arrives. So you need to get to it first. I need to secure it before he can destroy it. And that requires someone going in tonight, accessing the vault, and making sure those files survive until morning. Brennan's jaw tightened. I'm Army. I have training in tactical operations, but I'm also injured and compromised because of my father. If I'm caught, it gets dismissed as a vendetta. We need someone else. You need me. I need someone Carson won't expect. Someone with surgical precision and the ability to stay calm under pressure. Someone who's already proven they'll risk everything for the truth. He paused. Lauren can get you inside. She has codes and access. But once you're in that office, you're on your own. If security catches you, this entire case collapses and you go to prison. Claire thought about Amira Hassan, about Derek Foster, about 14 names and the hundreds more that might be in those files. What do I need to do? The plan was insane. That was Claire's first thought and her last thought and every thought in between as Voss drove her to Potomac at 2 a.m. Lauren Mitchell would arrive at Carson's estate at 3 a.m., claiming she'd left important documents in the office that were needed for an early morning meeting. She'd use her access codes to enter. Security knew her, trusted her. Once inside, she'd disable the motion sensors in Carson's office for exactly 12 minutes, long enough to claim a malfunction, short enough to avoid suspicion. Claire would enter through a service entrance, Lauren would leave unlocked. She'd have 12 minutes to reach the office, access the vault using codes Lauren provided, copy the server's contents to an external drive, and exit. If she succeeded, the files would be secured. If she failed, she'd be arrested for breaking and entering, theft, and espionage. This is completely illegal, Voss said for the 10th time. Even if you get the files, they might not be admissible. The warrant makes them admissible. I'm just ensuring they still exist when FBI arrives to execute it. That's not how warrants work. Then we're writing new rules. They parked 2 blocks from Carson's estate. Claire got out wearing dark clothes, carrying nothing except the external drive and a phone with Lauren's number programmed in. Jessica grabbed her arm. If you're caught, don't say anything. Not one word. Wait for me. I won't be caught. Everyone says that right before they're caught. Claire walked through expensive suburban streets where no one was awake at 3 a.m. except people with things to hide. Carson's estate loomed behind iron gates and manicured hedges. She circled to the service entrance Lauren had described, a door used by caterers and maintenance, less visible than the main entrance. Her phone buzzed. Lauren. I'm in. Sensors down in 60 seconds. Claire counted. At 60 seconds, she tried the door. It opened. The interior was exactly as Lauren had described. Marble floors, expensive art, the sterile perfection of wealth accumulated without conscience. Claire moved silently through hallways that smelled like furniture polish and old money. Carson's office was on the 2nd floor, east wing. She climbed the stairs. Her phone buzzed. 10 minutes remaining. The office was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens, a desk that probably cost more than Claire made in a year, shelves lined with military history books, and framed photos of Carson shaking hands with senators and generals. The vault was behind a painting. Lauren had said it would be. Claire removed the painting carefully and found a biometric scanner. She entered the override codes Lauren had provided. The vault opened. Inside was a server rack, compact but sophisticated, lights blinking in the darkness. Claire connected the external drive and started the copy process. The progress bar appeared, 47 gigabytes. Estimated time, 8 minutes. She had 10 minutes total. It would be close. While the files copied, Claire looked around the office. The photos on the walls told a story. Carson with every major defense official from the past decade, Carson at charity galas benefiting wounded warriors, Carson accepting industry awards for ethical business practices. All of it a lie. Her phone buzzed. 5 minutes. The progress bar was at 68%. Claire's pulse hammered. If the copy didn't finish before Lauren had to restore the sensors. Voices in the hallway. Claire froze. The voices got closer. 2 men, security by the sound of their footsteps. Thought Mitchell said she'd be in and out fast. She's probably still looking for whatever files she needs. You know how these executives are. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. Claire looked at the progress bar. 81%. 4 minutes left. The door handle turned. Claire grabbed the external drive, still connected, still copying, and dove behind Carson's desk just as the door opened. Light flooded the room. One of the security guards stepped inside. Thought I saw the office light on from outside. Motion sensors are acting up tonight, probably just a glitch. The guard walked further into the room. Claire pressed herself against the desk's side panel, barely breathing. The external drive was still visible, still connected to the server, its light blinking steadily. The guard was 3 steps from seeing it. Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket, silent mode, but the vibration was audible in the quiet room. The guard turned toward the sound, then Lauren's voice echoed from downstairs. "Hello? Security? I need help with something in the kitchen." The guard hesitated, then turned back. "Coming, Ms. Mitchell." He left the office, closing the door behind him. Claire exhaled and checked the progress bar. 94%, 2 minutes. Her phone buzzed again. "Lauren, they're coming back, 90 seconds. The files hit 100%. Claire disconnected the drive, closed the vault, replaced the painting, and moved toward the door. She could hear footsteps returning. She crossed the office and pressed against the wall beside the door, waiting. The footsteps passed. She counted to 10, then slipped out and moved silently back toward the stairs. A voice behind her. "Stop right there." Claire turned. One of the security guards stood at the end of the hallway, hand moving toward his radio. She ran, down the stairs, through the hallway, toward the service entrance. Behind her, alarms started blaring, more voices, running footsteps. She hit the service door and burst outside into the pre-dawn darkness. Voss's car was already moving, engine running. Claire threw herself into the back seat. "Drive!" Voss accelerated hard, tires squealing. Behind them, security guards poured out of the estate. But they were already around the corner, already gone. "Did you get it?" Jessica demanded. Claire held up the external drive. "Everything." They drove straight to the federal prosecutor's office. The building was dark, except for one lit window on the 4th floor, where Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos waited. Santos took the drive, plugged it into an isolated computer, and started reviewing files. Her expression changed from skeptical to shocked to grimly satisfied. "This is it. This is everything." She pulled up folder after folder, financial records, communication logs, shipping manifests, photographic evidence of meetings. Carson documented his entire operation. Every officer he bribed, every contract he manipulated, every shipment he diverted. It's like he was building his own case file. "Can you use it?" Claire asked. "The warrant was signed 20 minutes ago. FBI is moving on the estate at 0600. Whatever you saw tonight," Santos looked at Claire. "I didn't hear about it. You were never there. These files will be discovered during the lawful execution of a search warrant based on probable cause established by Lauren Mitchell's testimony. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. Now get out of my office before I have to know anything else." They left. Outside, dawn was breaking over D.C., gray light pushing back the darkness. Jessica turned to Claire. "You just committed multiple felonies." "I just ensured evidence survived long enough to matter." "That's not how the law works." "The law hasn't been working, so we helped it along." At exactly 6:03 a.m., FBI agents executed the search warrant on Victor Carson's estate. They found the vault, the server, and files that documented 15 years of defense contractor corruption involving 47 officers, 12 senators, and contracts worth $19 billion. Carson was arrested at 6:47 a.m. By 8 a.m., the story was everywhere. The news showed footage of Carson in handcuffs being led from his estate, FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence, federal prosecutors announcing the largest defense contractor fraud case in history. Claire watched it from a hotel room with Voss and Jessica, exhausted and running on adrenaline and the satisfaction of watching a guilty man finally face consequences. Her phone rang. Senator Morrison. "Captain Whitmore, I don't know what you did or how you did it, and I'm not going to ask. But whatever role you played in this, thank you. I didn't do anything except be in the right place at the right time." "Sure, and I'm the Tooth Fairy." Morrison's voice warmed slightly. The Armed Services Committee is launching a full investigation into everyone named in those files. This is going to take years to unravel, but it's happening. Real reform, real accountability. And it started because you refused to stay quiet. It started because 14 people died who shouldn't have. And now their deaths might actually mean something. That's rare, Captain. Don't minimize it. The call ended. Over the next 3 weeks, the dominoes fell faster than anyone expected. Carson's files were a roadmap to corruption that investigators had spent years trying to document. Officers were arrested. Contractors lost security clearances. Congressional hearings revealed a system so compromised that complete restructuring became inevitable. Colonel Richard Brennan, facing overwhelming evidence from his former partner's files, accepted a plea deal. 30 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. In exchange, he testified against everyone else involved, providing details that closed gaps in the prosecution's cases. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan Jr. was given immunity for his role in securing evidence. He received a commendation for his cooperation with federal investigators and returned to active duty with a transfer to the Army's Inspector General office. Lauren Mitchell entered witness protection after receiving death threats from people implicated in the files. But before she disappeared, she sent Claire a message. "My brother can rest now. Thank you." Victor Carson's trial was scheduled for the following year, but with the evidence against him, his attorneys were already negotiating a plea. The man who'd built an empire on stolen military supplies and soldiers' deaths would spend the rest of his life in prison. Claire returned to Portland. Riverside General Hospital welcomed her back not as a suspended nurse, but as Dr. Claire Whitmore, trauma surgery fellow. The fellowship was intense. 18-hour shifts, complex cases, constant learning. But it was honest work, lives saved through skill instead of silence. 3 months after Carson's arrest, the hospital held a small ceremony. Dr. Thornhill presented Claire with a formal commendation recognizing her actions, saving Private Ramsey and Lieutenant Brennan. It takes a special kind of courage to step forward when every instinct says to stay hidden, Thornhill said to the assembled staff. Dr. Whitmore showed that courage twice, once in a trauma bay and once in front of the entire country. She's proven that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. The staff applauded. Some of them, the ones who'd whispered about her suspension, who doubted her, who'd assumed she was hiding something shameful, looked embarrassed. Others, the ones who'd quietly supported her, smiled. Sarah Morrison, the day shift nurse who'd gossiped in the hallway, approached after the ceremony. "I owe you an apology. I said things about you that weren't fair. I assumed the worst instead of giving you the benefit of the doubt." Claire shook her head. "You didn't know the whole story. No one did." "Still, I should have been better." Sarah hesitated. "For what it's worth, you're kind of a legend now. The nurses in ER tell new hires about you, the quiet one who turned out to be a combat surgeon who took down a colonel. I didn't do it alone." That's not how legends work. That evening, Claire returned to her apartment, a new place, different building, no memories of break-ins or surveillance. She'd started over completely. New address, new phone number, new life. Her phone rang, the new number that only a few people had. Rachel Voss. "Turn on PBS." Claire turned on her TV. PBS was airing a documentary. The Kandahar Files, How Military Corruption Cost Lives and One Surgeon's Fight for Justice. The documentary featured her testimony before Congress, interviews with soldiers who'd served in Afghanistan, analysis of the supply chain corruption, and ultimately the arrests that had followed. It presented the entire story as a testament to whistleblower courage and systemic change. Claire watched herself on screen testifying, her voice steady, her words precise. She barely recognized that person, so certain, so committed, so willing to risk everything. That person had been terrified, but she'd done it anyway. The documentary ended with an update. Major reforms to defense procurement, new oversight committees, criminal convictions totaling 400 years of combined prison time, and then a final message. In memory of the 14 patients who died in Kandahar province, and all those who died because someone chose profit over duty. The 14 names appeared on screen. Claire read each one, remembering their faces, their injuries, the moment each had died. Amira Hassan, Sergeant James Porter, Corporal Linda Vasquez, all the others, They hadn't died for nothing anymore. 6 months after returning to Riverside General, Claire was in a trauma bay when a familiar patient arrived. Private Joel Ramsey, the soldier whose carotid repair had started everything. He recognized her immediately. "Doc Whitmore, I heard you were back. How's the neck?" "Perfect. No complications. The surgeon who checked my follow-up said whoever did the initial repair had hands like a magician." Ramsey grinned. "I told them it was you. They didn't believe me until I showed them the news articles." "What brings you to the ER today?" "Routine medical clearance for redeployment. Heading back to active duty next month." His grin faded slightly. "I wanted to thank you, not just for saving my life, but for what you did after. My unit lost 3 guys in Afghanistan because the field hospital ran out of supplies. Nobody ever explained why. After everything came out about Brennan and Carson, we finally understood, and we finally knew someone gave a damn enough to fight for us." Claire felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry about your friends. They'd be proud someone like you was looking out for the rest of us." Ramsey extended his hand. "Stay strong, Doc." After he left, Claire stood in the empty trauma bay for a moment, thinking about all the lives that intersected with hers. Some saved, some lost, all mattering. Her phone buzzed. "Lieutenant Brennan, thought you'd want to know. The Army is naming the new medical oversight program after Corporal Nathan Mitchell, Lauren's brother. Seems fitting." Claire typed back, "It is." That night, she had dinner with Jessica and Voss at a restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. They toasted to justice, to survival, to the stubborn refusal to let guilty people win through silence. "What's next for you?" Jessica asked. Claire considered this question. 6 months ago, she'd been hiding in a cabin, running from federal agents, facing criminal charges. Now she was a trauma surgery fellow with a clean record, a growing reputation, and a future that looked nothing like the past. "I'm starting a program at the hospital, training for combat medics transitioning to civilian medicine, help them navigate credentials, deal with PTSD, find their footing, give them what I didn't have." Voss raised her glass. "From victim to advocate, classic arc. From survivor to someone who makes sure others don't have to just survive," Claire corrected. They drank to that. Months became a year. The congressional investigations continued, uncovering deeper layers of corruption. More arrests followed. The entire defense procurement system underwent restructuring. Senator Morrison won re-election on a platform of military reform. Colonel Brennan's trial proceeded. He was found guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge noted that Brennan's actions had betrayed the soldiers he was sworn to protect and prioritized personal profit over human lives. The sentence, 45 years in federal prison. Victor Carson's trial resulted in similar outcomes. 73 years for conspiracy, fraud, theft of government property, and accessory to negligent homicide. At age 58, it was effectively a life sentence. The civilian contractors who'd participated received sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. The officers who'd taken bribes faced courts-martial and military prison. The system that had protected them for so long finally held them accountable. Claire completed her trauma surgery fellowship 18 months after returning to Riverside General. Her graduation was attended by hospital staff, former Army colleagues who'd flown in from across the country, and Lieutenant Marcus Brennan Jr., who'd become an unexpected friend. Dr. Thornhill presented her certification. Dr. Claire Whitmore has demonstrated exceptional skill, unwavering integrity, and the kind of courage we hope for in physicians but rarely see. She's proven that the right thing is always worth doing, even when the cost seems unbearable. It's my privilege to certify her as a trauma surgeon." The room applauded. Claire accepted the certification, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: pride without qualification, achievement without asterisks, a future built on truth instead of silence. After the ceremony, Lieutenant Brennan approached. "My father's appeal was denied yesterday. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Thought you'd want to know." "How are you handling that?" "Better than I expected. He tried to kill me to protect his crimes. That's not a father. That's a criminal who happened to share my DNA." Brennan looked at the certification in Claire's hands. "You saved my life twice. Once on that operating table, and once by refusing to let my father's corruption continue. I'll never forget that. You returned the favor by helping take down Carson. We make a good team." He smiled slightly. "Speaking of which, The Army's Inspector General Office is looking for medical consultants, people who understand both military operations and healthcare, people who won't be intimidated by rank or politics. Interested? Claire thought about it. A year ago, she would have said no. She'd wanted nothing to do with the military, with investigations, with anything that reminded her of what she'd lost. But she wasn't that person anymore. Send me the details. 6 months later, Dr. Claire Whitmore stood in front of another congressional committee, this time as an expert witness on military medical reform. She presented recommendations for supply chain oversight, whistleblower protections, and accountability measures designed to prevent another Kandahar. Senator Morrison, still chairing the Armed Services Committee, listened to every word and then asked one question. Dr. Whitmore, you've spent 3 years fighting a system that tried to destroy you. You've been suspended, investigated, arrested, threatened, and vilified. Knowing what you know now, would you do it again? Claire didn't hesitate. Yes. Even knowing the cost? Especially knowing the cost. Because the alternative is silence. And silence protects the guilty while more people die. I couldn't live with that 3 years ago. I can't live with it now. The only difference is now I know I'm not alone in refusing to accept it. The hearing room was quiet. Morrison nodded slowly. Thank you, Dr. Whitmore. Your recommendations will be incorporated into our reform legislation. The reforms passed 6 months later. The Kandahar Accountability Act established new oversight for military medical supply chains, created protected channels for whistleblowers, and mandated independent audits of defense contractor operations. It wouldn't prevent all corruption, but it would make the next attempt harder. And it would make the next person who tried to speak up less alone. 2 years after Colonel Brennan's arrest, Claire stood in Arlington National Cemetery at a memorial service for Corporal Nathan Mitchell and the 13 other soldiers who died in Kandahar. Lauren Mitchell had emerged from witness protection briefly to attend. The families of the deceased were there. They'd been told the truth about what happened, about why their loved ones had died, about the corruption that had stolen supplies and lives. Several families approached Claire afterward. Thank you, Amir Hassan's father said quietly. He'd traveled from Afghanistan for the ceremony. My daughter wanted to be a doctor. She died before she could. But you became one, and you made sure her death meant something. That gives me peace. Claire had no words. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. That evening, she returned to her apartment and looked at the box she'd kept from Afghanistan. The photographs of her surgical team, the commendations, the file on Kandahar. She didn't need to hide it anymore. She didn't need to hide anything. The next morning, Claire reported to Riverside General's trauma unit as an attending physician. Her first shift included 2 gunshot wounds, a motorcycle accident, and a cardiac emergency. She saved 3 lives before lunch. In the break room afterward, one of the newer residents asked about the news articles he'd found online. Is it true you testified against a colonel and took down a defense contractor? Claire poured coffee. It's true I told the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Why? I mean, you risked everything. Claire thought about Amir Hassan, about 14 names, about Derek Foster and Lauren Mitchell, and everyone who'd paid the price for someone else's greed. Because some things are more important than safety, justice, accountability, making sure the next person doesn't have to fight alone. She met the resident's eyes. You'll face moments in your career where doing the right thing costs you, where speaking up feels impossible, where staying quiet seems smarter. And in those moments, you'll have to decide who you are. I decided I'd rather be someone who fought and lost than someone who stayed silent and safe. Did you lose? Claire smiled. Look around. I'm a trauma surgeon. I'm saving lives, and the people who tried to destroy me are in prison. Does that look like losing to you? The resident smiled back. No, Dr. Whitmore, it doesn't. 3 years after walking into that trauma bay and saving Private Ramsey, Claire Whitmore stood on the rooftop of Riverside General at sunset, looking out over Portland. The city spread below her in lights and movement, full of people who'd never know her name but whose lives were safer because she'd refused to accept injustice. Her phone buzzed. Rachel Voss. New case, military contractor fraud in logistics. Whistleblower needs help. Interested? Claire typed back immediately. Send me the details. Because the fight wasn't over. It would never be completely over. There would always be people who valued profit over lives, who used power to escape consequences, who counted on silence to protect their crimes. But there would also be people like Claire, people who'd survived being buried and learned to dig their way out. People who understood that the truth mattered more than comfort, that justice required sacrifice, that speaking up, even when your voice shook, was how you stopped the next tragedy. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was Dr. Claire Whitmore, trauma surgeon, military reform consultant, and someone who'd learned that the hardest battles were worth fighting precisely because they were hard. The sun set over Portland, darkness giving way to city lights and endless possibility. And somewhere in that city, someone else was gathering the courage to speak up, to fight back, to refuse silence. They wouldn't have to do it alone. Claire would make sure of that, because that's what survivors did. They turned their scars into armor, their pain into purpose, their silence into a voice that couldn't be ignored. The system had tried to break her. Instead, she'd broken the system and rebuilt herself into something stronger.